Welcome, and hope you're having a nice Thanksgiving week coming up. This is the 10th meeting of the Charter Review Commission on Monday, November 20th. We'll start the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and again, welcome. So we're already on to item 3. Tonight was reserved for, we were going to reserve 2 hours of the 3-hour meeting for the town council. I received word on Friday morning that the town council was not going to be here tonight. They had a prep meeting on Wednesday, which failed for lack of a quorum. Nancy Driggs was in attendance at that, and she did get a preview of some draft documents, which were sent around, although, so they are in the public record. But we will not take up much time today on the town council today. That is why we made the call to amend the agenda Friday. As soon as I got that word, to add more substance, which you might have noticed down on item 8. We added additional proposals so that we can at least engage in preliminary discussion. In fact, we reached out and asked Jeff and Donna to work together to actually pick some of the pretty heavy topics, particularly including the casino items, since my understanding is the town council has had one and maybe another subcommittee in the works and a number of meetings, and they've certainly been talking about it, although they have yet to transmit to us any proposals. So I'd like to suggest we'll spend a significant amount of time today taking that subject on head on. I will certainly continue to be in touch with the town council president and also the town administrator to try to get them back in, but we are going to keep the schedule on December 4th, since we've already committed to that, to be the second open mic night, if you will, for members of the public, although they're welcome to speak at every meeting, but that meeting will reserve most of the entire meeting for them. So we may be able to have the town council there, maybe not. Did you want to add anything, Nancy, or anybody else that has? I know some of you have gone to some of the town council workshops, or did I cover that topic?
No, I think you covered it. Just so everyone knows, there were 3 people. Excuse me. 3 people were present at the meeting on the 15th. It was council person Ryan Edwards and Denise Medeiros came in later. Anthony, the town solicitor, was there, as was the town administrator. And when Denise de Medeiros arrived a little bit late, and I was prepared to video it, I had the video machine all set up. She said that Joe Perry wasn't going to be there. Nobody seemed to know where Joan was, and Randy LeBeau had sort of said, maybe I'll come, maybe I won't, were sort of the quote we got from him. So I don't know what's going on. And then at the very end, excuse me, Anthony DeSisto did hand out some their proposed what they were going to vote on that night if there had been a quorum. And he said I was entitled to a copy. It was a public document, and they just wrote on it drafts to indicate that they hadn't voted on it yet. And so I gave a copy to Rob.
Okay, well, we'll continue to do the best we can. As at our last meeting, we did have some of the department heads and town officials here that had some preliminary drafts of documents that have been circulated but not yet formally approved by the town council. But as far as I can see, we need to keep our train moving here, and we'll continue to invite them to come along. Mm-hmm. So having said that, we will then proceed to agenda item 4, which is to acknowledge the receipt of review comments and consideration requests that's come in since the last meeting. These are new proposals, number 71, 72, 73, and 74. Number 71 comes from a member of the public, Michael Dakotas, which would expand the town council terms to 4 years. I don't see that gentleman in the audience today. So I will let you consult your packet on that. Donna, number 72, taxpayer rebate of casino gaming revenue. This is, again, just a preliminary introduction. If you'd like to take just a couple moments and outline that, if you'd like.
Okay, I came up with this proposal after various comments at town council meetings and subcommittee meetings and minutes of meetings. So I decided 25% of annual casino gaming revenue shall be placed in a capital improvement fund, and 75% of annual casino gaming revenue shall be refunded or rebated to taxpayers via a check in proportion to their property tax bill. Why the requested change? Tiverton taxpayers deserve significant tax relief. This proposal directs 75% of the casino gaming back to the taxpayers, so that individual families versus the government can decide how to best use the money. Some townspeople seek a fund indicated to town infrastructure improvements. As a compromise to these townspeople, this proposal directs 25% of the casino gaming revenue to a capital improvement fund. The effect: rather than the government deciding for them, taxpaying families could decide how to best use 75% of the casino gaming revenue. 75% of the gaming revenue would remain outside of the FTR annual budgeting process. Hence, the annual town budget would not be reliant on it, thereby addressing a concern expressed by others. The 75% refund or rebate / 25% capital improvement fund model is consistent with the town of Lincoln's historical practice of 75.8% of the general fund to / 24.3% of the capital program fund in that town. A minimum of $750,000 per year would fund the capital improvement fund. It would be a new section. We have seen some proposals that actually want 1/9 of the gaming revenue to be for tax improvement for 1 year, and then the rest of it, or 8/9 of it, would be in different buckets and spending, or, whatever their ideas are. I just thought many people felt that they wanted the gaming revenue to take care of taxes, but it might not end up that way. So I said the only way to protect the taxpayer was to actually give it back to them. Then you can decide what you want to do with it. So that was my reasoning for that.
Thank you, Donna. I will probably ask that this item actually get consolidated in with item 8A, since it does touch on casino money later in tonight's discussion. But before we get there, this is, at this moment, not a time for debate. Are there any questions by way of clarification for Donna on proposal ID 72? Sir.
So tell me about the difference between this and tax relief.
That would be your tax relief. Either it's going to come from the tax levy being lowered, or taking a chance that someone's going to let the gaming revenue go for that.
Well, if you say,
You can put it towards your taxes if you want.
you say 75% refund or 25% blah, blah, blah. If you say 75% instead of refund goes into the general fund, mathematically, it comes out the same.
Right, but the people are deciding what they want to do with the money.
They will decide what they want to do with the
No,
money when their taxes aren't as high.
It's not going to go into the budget process, so you don't know what's going to happen with it. You don't know what's going to happen with it.
Well, if you
This is-
put it in the charter that 3/4 of it has to go into the general fund,
No, it's 25%, no. 25% is going to the
Yeah, capital investment
improvement.
fund, 75% is gonna go to the taxpayers.
Yeah.
With, you know, in consideration of how much they pay in taxes.
Yeah.
But if, by the same token, if you said 75% is gonna go for tax relief and into the general fund, it's the same thing.
Well, then, but you have control over the money going back to you. With I understand what you're saying, but you have very little control if it starts to go into different buckets and there's a different system going in. You have no control over that. And that's what you're taking a chance at.
So-
This way, the person can decide if they want to put it towards, you're already going to get, from the taxation and hotel tax and whatever they're going to decide for the, how much the buildings are worth, that's going to go into tax relief, because it's going to go into the budget. So you're going to have that money that you don't have now, and possibly more.
Just a
Excuse
second,
me?
sorry.
Did
Do you
you
want-
want
Is
to
that
say
a point of
something?
order, or, oh, I apologize, okay. Yeah, I do, I promise you, we're gonna repurpose almost all of that town council time, and this is gonna be a whole hour on the casino, so I just wanna, just, so,
It's just
so,
that he
so,
had
I'm
asked
here,
for-
no,
Well,
it's
it's
a
just, this isn't
mechanical
really the
question,
casino,
right?
it's how you divvy
Right.
up, well, I guess it is.
I was gonna
It's
ask
how you
the
divvy
floor.
up the money.
All right, let me, I'll let Jeff jump in, again, we're not here in full debate, we'll get to that in about 20, 30 minutes, but
I was just going to follow up with Ray's comment in that you are correct, Ray, that net in the wallet's the same if you make the assumption that the money, once it's in the general fund, does lower the taxes. And there's at least some question that would actually occur, in my mind. So I think that based upon that, I think your immediate conclusion that it goes to the general fund, therefore taxes lower, we can expand on that more in more discussion. That's, I think, where the concern might be, perhaps, that Donna raises.
okay, to be continued. I'm gonna give you two first bidding here at item 8A, just a little bit. Yes, go ahead.
Donna, so 75% is gonna go back to just taxpayers, right? Property tax.
Yeah.
payers. Do they all get
Proportion to their,
Do
to,
they all get an equal share?
No.
no, it goes to, depending on what they pay for taxes, is proportional. I mean, someone that's paying way more than I shouldn't just get what I get. I mean, they're proportionately, they're paying more. So
Okay.
that's what it says proportionally.
And non-taxpayers would get nothing.
Well, yeah,
Why would they?
I'm just asking.
yeah.
I'm not
No, this is
asking
about
anything.
property tax,
Only,
yeah.
not personal property, just real
Is
estate
it
property.
motor vehicle too, or business?
I didn't
or-
say anything about motor vehicle.
So that's an open question?
I don't know, this is, my thoughts were, the levy was for the property taxes, whether it's business or whether it's your home, that's,
So,
so there it is.
so the casino would get a check too.
Now, there's a thought.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing, maybe they deserve a check, all right? But if we say property tax payers, then they get a check. And you wanna take this money outside of the FTR to prevent the town from spending it, regardless of the FTRs.
It's already they're already considering it to be outside the FTR. I don't think it should be out of the FTR, but since they're considering it and using special wording to consider doing that, I felt that I wanted to protect the taxpayer and let them decide what they wanted to do with the money,
And the they, who's the
Yeah,
they?
who is they?
taxpayers.
No, you said it's
people.
taking outside the
He
FTR.
said,
If the town already
Others.
seems to be, the talk is they want to keep it outside of the budget and FTR process.
right,
I would like them to keep it in that process, But just in case it doesn't happen, I want to have some protection for the taxpayer.
So this is, if we're going to start talking about keeping money outside of the FTR process, well, let's talk about this. Is that your opinion?
That's the only reason,
Thank you.
yeah.
Ray, one more, and we'll be back, promise.
Oh, okay. So the people that were on the budget committee, how do you decide how much you're going to spend? Do you figure out how much tax you're going to collect and then allocate that? Or do you ask for budgets and then do the tax, calculate the tax from that?
Did you want to answer that?
I'd be
Jeff?
happy to. It depends a little bit on who the budget committee is,
Yeah.
how it's composed of. But formally speaking, the requests come in, okay? And they are supposed to be scrutinized in view of their value to the taxpayer and their cost to the taxpayer. From that, a recommendation is made. And that's the formal process. That does happen some years. I have seen years on the budget committee when the requests are primarily rubber stamped, okay, without the scrutiny process. But when the dust settles, regardless of which route that goes, that equation that I did, remember that was the total amount of money you need minus the non-property tax revenue equals the levy? That equation applies. And some years, at the very end, it's like, wow, that's a big increase. Can we chisel away a little more? And we'll go back and revote some things to chisel it down. In other years, that number just falls through. Oops, it's 3.5% increase, or it's an 8% increase, if you might remember. Or it's an 11% increase, oh well, and it just gets passed on for a vote. So I hope that answers your question.
It does.
And I would just add, this, last year was the first year of my 3 years on the Budget Committee where there actually was sort of verbalized at the beginning of our thinking about, as people came in requesting money, that we were going to try to keep, as a Budget Committee, keep the levy down. And that was the first time I've ever been aware that there was sort of an awareness of that. Did it happen? Not, not so much, but basically, and I agree with what Jeff said, basically.
Okay, thank you. So again, I'll ask, remind me if I forget to add that to the agenda when we get down to 8A. I already introduced, on behalf of Mr. Mike Dakotas, number 71. Did you want to add any comments?
Sorry, I'm late.
No problem. We're not debating, but
Conference.
no pressure, but I wanted to offer you the mic if you wanted just a few into it.
Pretty self-explanatory, so
Okay, very well.
thank you for acknowledging it.
Sure. Okay, so items 4C and 4D, this is not new content. These are forms which trailed the school committee's proposals from a couple meetings ago. Those are number 70 through 74. We do have our liaison here. Ms. Black, did you want to add anything further, or we'll just take those into the record? Okay. And I did, at least by my count, there were other proposals, so you tell me if you will more come, or at the end of by December 31st, I can put them in for you, but you'll have to take your chances that I'll get the wording just right. So, but thank you very much. So again, I don't, items 4C and 4D, that's 70 through 74, we've already had presentation from the school committee. I'm told, yep, do we have another one that's,
Well,
Nancy?
given that we're going to be talking about casino revenue, it is not on the agenda because I just have prepared it. But I would like to have it out there for at least possibly discussion at the point when we get to discussing. And basically, and everybody can.
Right, so just really quickly, just to put our secretaries on the spot, do we have any other proposals that have come in writing since we published the agenda?
No.
Okay. All right, is there any objection to adding to the agenda Ms. Triggs' proposal, which is already prepared in writing?
Which it's here, and I'll explain it.
Is there a number to that?
I guess it'll be.
I'll make, sorry. No, there's no number yet, because it hasn't gone through the secretary.
Yeah, I think this is coming in real time, although it is in writing, so it fits the agenda, but do we want to?
I'll make a motion to add it to the agenda.
Okay, we have a, and this would again,
I'll
just for
s- I'll
discussion
s-
only.
I'll second it.
All right, is there any further discussion on the motion to add discussion purposes only? No? Okay, all those in favor? Any objection? Okay, thank you, go ahead.
So basically, thinking about the casino revenue, my proposal is to make 100% of the casino gaming revenue refunded or rebated back to the taxpayer. They obviously would get the money from the property tax is a separate issue, but the gaming revenue, 100% refunded or rebate. And the reason for that is tracking the changes that have been under consideration by the casino subcommittee to date. And I know they haven't, actually, the subcommittee is basically beginning to finish its work, and then it's going to go to an advisory committee to come up with options. But as I think Jeff pointed out earlier, one of the options that they're thinking about, for instance, is literally 1/9 of the casino gaming revenue would go towards tax relief, and the rest would go into various buckets. And I'm just very nervous that the proposals that we've heard, and as you know, we haven't had anything explicit from the town council, but what is being floated out there definitely looks like an attempt to not have this money go into the general fund for tax relief. So we can discuss it, but that was the purpose for this.
So just to summarize, is it more or less in the ballpark of what we just heard from Donna, except you have a different percentage?
Correct.
Okay.
Mine would be 100%, and yes.
Okay. So I'm going to suggest that we just take that up in a few minutes on item 8. Is there any objection?
Rob, I'd like to also make sure we include number 55, which is my proposal on casino gaming amount.
It's on there.
It takes a little bit different twist, but similar, so I think it ought to be discussed.
It is, it's here for the discussion.
Will do.
On the next, yes.
Okay.
Okay, we will come back to that. This is my way of seeing how fast we can get through the admin, now that you're all excited about debating casino items. Let's move on to item number 5. This would be adoption of our minutes from our last meeting. Again, I'd like to thank the team here that's been turning these minutes out, I think without fail, by the next meeting, and I think that's really well done. In this case, Nancy, who is one of our assistant secretaries, did take the minutes. I believe they were also reviewed by Richard as well. So your secretarial team has proposed these. Are there any suggested amendments or corrections to the minutes?
I don't see anything wrong with them. Just-
Hearing none, may I have a motion to accept as presented the minutes from the November 6th meeting as presented by the assistant secretary and the secretary?
I'll make a motion to accept.
Mr. Corrs made a motion. Will there be a second? We have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any objections, abstentions? Passed unanimously, 9-0. Again, thank you. Administrative items, we do have an item that we do need to take a formal vote on. This is the adoption of the 2018 meeting schedule. Richard, did you want to briefly introduce that? You'll need a microphone, too.
Well, it's the schedule that we could best count on. The public library, of course, is what we would rather prefer to have because of their acoustics and their capabilities. But whether or not we can get it is sometimes a problem. So we just took the easiest path, and the most reliable path, and that's the town hall. So we'll have 4 Tiverton library meetings, and then the rest in the town hall.
Subject to change, though. Great. And again, this continues our current practice of meeting on Monday nights, 7 o'clock on the 1st and 3rd, and potentially 5th, as applicable Mondays, up through Monday, July 16th. You will remember that by charter, our 1-year terms automatically expire 1 year from the certification of the special election by the Board of Canvassers, which I think was July 18th, 2017. This, again, meets a public requirement. There's nothing that stops us from calling additional meetings, and I suspect we probably will, and as well as some public hearings as well. This does require a formal vote. Is there any, I should double check, I'm sorry, on that Tuesday, January 2nd, are we, that, of course, is a holiday. Anything to say there, or it speaks for itself? Everybody happy with that? Okay. And Monday, February 19th, is that technically President's Day? Is that, do I have that right? We've had this before with the holidays. I think we didn't really have a problem sticking with
19th is President's Day. February, you said?
February 19th.
That is President's.
That is President's Day, thank you. I have no objection to meeting them, but I did just want to call it out. Okay, well, here, we can change that if
I don't, just a note, but isn't January, am I wrong or right? Is January the 15th MLK?
January 15th?
Isn't that Martin Luther
that
King Day
sounds
this year?
right. Yep, so we've got a couple holidays here. Those are 3-day weekends, but I think we did meet on a holiday before.
Yeah, I'm just pointing out.
You know, there's no requirement that we have to avoid them. There's no requirement that we have to always meet on Mondays, so,
A lot of holidays on Monday.
okay. All right. Did you have any? we good? Okay. Again, this is, this can be amended and updated, but we do need to get this posted by the end of the calendar year. We're actually a month ahead of schedule, so thank you. Can I have a motion to adopt the notice of regular meetings in 2018 as presented by our secretary?
I'll move.
Will there be a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Unanimously passed, thank you. And again, thank you for preparing that. Other administrative items, I think we are now lined up for video. I'm happy to report that. And I just spoke with our videographer shortly, and I think if not every single meeting, at least most of them, we're in good shape on video. I do not have anything further to report on admin. Donna?
No, I don't have anything.
Anybody else? Okay, great. That brings us to agenda item 7. Now, for those, I'm not going to repeat, we did spend a fair amount of time going over some sort of rules for these are preliminary votes only. For those that were not present at the last meeting, it's not going to get a preliminary vote unless it's already had preliminary discussion. And I want to be as clear can be. This is just non-binding. This just gives ourselves and the public a sense of where the commission is going. It also helps us work efficiently. You'll notice from your packet that the 4 items that were preliminary approved at the last meeting, we did send a formal letter to the town solicitor to ask for preliminary workup for legal. So that's what we have here. And as is our practice, the sponsor will be given the opportunity to continue the matter without any vote, or if he or she would like a vote, then they get the first shot at that. So again, these are preliminary voting, so I won't be too strict about it, but since it's had discussion, this isn't really another round of extended debate. If it needs extended debate, then hopefully the sponsor will agree to continue the matter. So maybe we can keep this at a few minutes each. That brings us to item 7A, proposal ID number 40 by Richard Rahm, collection and distribution of union fees. Richard?
I'm passing around an amplification of what I want this proposal to be. And to explain why the change is needed is unions should function independent of town services and functions. Town services, the town receives no benefits from union functions. Unions exist to benefit and protect the union hierarchy and its members. When I say hierarchy, I of course reference the union bosses, all of the management, but not necessarily the members. So I sometimes refer to them differently. I think the union often refer to their members as the rank and file. There are many state and federal laws on record that protect and benefit union hierarchy and union members. These laws are special interests of the union and do not benefit our town. Unions fund their hierarchy, salaries, benefit, and expenses, and all activities from union dues collected from their members. Unions functioning within the state of Rhode Island and the town employees, unions functioning within the state of Rhode Island force town employees to join a union. And I will provide the state laws that specify that. Union contracts specify that the town shall collect dues from the employee's paycheck. And at the bottom here, I went through, there's a ton of contracts. And getting through these things is sometimes painful. There are more contracts that specify them, but each one of them will specify in some section that the town must collect the union dues. Union hierarchies lobby for legal protections and benefits for their members and themselves, and I don't have a problem with that. There are many state and federal laws to be provided on record that protect and benefit union members and hierarchies. These laws are the special interests of the union and do not benefit our town. If the union hierarchies need to collect dues from their members to support their activities, lobbying being one of them, then they must be responsible for the collections of the dues. Otherwise, collection of union dues by the town of Tiverton is quite possibly in conflict with sections 1218, use of town resources to influence voting contests. They use those funds to lobby, and therefore they are using those funds to influence voting. So I suggest our modifications. We're probably going to need a new section in the town charter. We have other proposals. I think, Jeff, you have one on making all of the union negotiations open. I think, Donna, you've got one to limit any, to limit union members for negotiating for the town. And I couldn't find anything in the town charter that would, any section that really applied to. So I'm thinking maybe, as I said here, the charter is silent on labor negotiations. I suggest a new section. Wording for it would be fairly simple. The town shall not use any town resources for any association that engages with contract laborers within the town.
So, Richard, would you like to see a preliminary action on this? Your choices are, we can continue the matter for further study, we can look for preliminary approval, or we could look for preliminary rejection. At this early stage, I would only ask that we entertain rejection from the sponsor, that would be you, if that's what you seek, or we can continue on with no vote whatsoever. Do you have a preference?
I would prefer to get, I would prefer to know as much about how the panel feels, or the charter, excuse me. So I would prefer a wide open vote, whether or not you want to reject it. If you want to reject it, that's fine too. If you want to continue it, that's terrific. Or if you want to say, I approve or reject. So I would prefer as much information as soon as possible.
Okay. Jeff, go ahead.
Okay, so you weren't here. I know you were ill and you were out of town as well. So there was at the last meeting, there was a document distributed which were the, I'm going to call it the rules for engagement on this preliminary voting, which in a nutshell, I think for at this point, would require you or somebody to either to take no action, in which it just stays open on the sheets, or to make a motion to reject the item preliminarily, or to make a motion to continue the item, or to make a motion to preliminarily approve the item. Those were the four different possible outcomes at this point. So in keeping with that, and I think Rob is generally, I think the document extends the courtesy to the sponsor to, to make that initiative. One thing, so anyway, that's, I think, the procedure. So I think Rob's going to look for a motion to continue, approve, or reject, or just pass and it just stays open on our sheet. I have substantive comment, but I'll reserve that for when we go around the round table. On
That's
this.
right. If after a second call I hear no motion, it will stay alive automatically.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
although I do want to attempt to keep this, because this has had preliminary discussion, and the whole effort here is to be efficient, so I don't want to have a full-on debate on this. So if we want to have some comments, let's try to maybe keep it at 5 minutes. And I would say, when in doubt, keep it open.
Right.
And, that, at this stage as well. Plus, to be very clear, every single proposal, at least every single one that isn't withdrawn by the sponsor, will get a formal vote in January or later when we have our deliberation phase, because that's our workflow. Okay, so who wants to talk about number 40, which is the one that was just reintroduced? Okay. Jeff may have beat you to the punch. So why don't we go with Jeff and then Ray on substantive stuff? I'm going to try to keep us at 5 minutes.
I think this proposal has merit, and I just want to also point out that what we learned and what we witnessed last week is that if one gets approved preliminarily, then that triggers our leadership team to do things like to run it up to the solicitor to start, beating it against that tree. And so if we were to approve this, which I personally would support, but if we were to approve this, it would start that process, because this one, of course, is going to be controversial at some level, and we're going to want to thread those needles earlier rather than later. So if this has the support to be approved, a side benefit would be that the legal, that some of that upfront work can get done now instead of when it's snowing out in February.
Ray?
Yeah,
Right.
right. Okay, it's not clear to me when that if we already have a contract with the unions, we can't, and we just say, okay, we're not going to take the money out anymore, isn't that a breach of contract?
Yes, it would be. So you can't just do it.
So you have to wait till the next
You have to
cycle?
wait till the next
Okay,
cycle.
yeah, that's it, okay. And another question is, I don't understand what you mean by any association that engages with contracts, labor with the town. Just the wording's a little strange to me.
Yeah, it's a little strange. I was trying to be a little more vague than just saying labor unions. Is there anything else where, like an individual, there's a lot of individual contracts.
Yep,
They're not nearly as complicated as these.
union
Uh,
contract.
But most of the union contracts have dues taken out.
Yeah, no, I get that,
So
yeah.
I just wanted to make it a little more vague, and I didn't do a very good job of it. I suppose we could just put labor unions.
Yeah, well, so any association includes labor unions?
Yeah.
Oh,
we could
okay.
do something like that.
Yeah, couldn't tell if it included or excluded.
Yeah. It's not worded very well, but I will.
Yeah,
Clear
okay,
it.
no problem.
Nancy?
I would also support this. I think it has a lot of merit. It's almost sort of irrespective of any any cost, it's just the fact, the cost to the town, it's the fact that the town is participating
Right.
in helping. And I understand and would agree with figuring out language that would have it not just include labor unions, but if there are other areas where that same kind of
Activity. might
activity
occur.
happens,
Right.
that would include that, but that can be worked out in the language, so I would support it.
I guess, and again, this is not, this is just for the mechanics of collecting and distributing fees, right? This is not paying personnel to perform union activities during union time, right?
I'm not quite sure I follow the question, Ron.
Oh,
Well, in some arrangements, the government, or the government will fund half an FTE or a full FTE or some fraction to actually allow the union to engage on their organizational activities as part of their job. This proposal doesn't reach that. This
No,
proposal
no.
is merely the
My
mechanics.
next
Okay.
proposal will reach that.
Okay, okay.
There's still plenty of proposals.
I would just observe, I mean, just to potentially argue the other side, is that this is then essentially a mechanical thing. And so this might be something that isn't a lot of work, but it might be an easy give if it's just mechanical, much like if you had part of your pay deducted and sent off to your credit union or to your disability policy or something. So I would just make that observation that in the wheeling and dealing of the negotiations, and I know we haven't had a workshop, I'm hoping to do that December 20th, to talk about how this goes. I think it could be argued that this does take away one card in the hand of the town council, the school committee, or whoever's negotiating these. So I just think that needs to be perhaps said. Does any other brief comments?
I've got a
Yep. I think,
comment.
Jeff, did you want to respond to what I just said or something
I'll
else?
save mine. You want
Okay,
me to
all
go first?
right. Yep, if something new, go ahead.
I would just like to ask Richard if there's any Rhode Island precedent for this type of activity. In addition to being controversial, I could see where this thing could end up burning a huge amount of effort by this organization. And I don't know if this is the one that we want to do that on. But is there any precedent that you're aware of, Richard?
No, there's no precedence that I'm aware of. I haven't researched it yet, though.
what precedent for doing it or for not doing
Yeah,
it?
for not
Actually, for not
collecting the union dues,
Precedent for collecting them,
For now.
for
There's
not
plenty of
collecting
that.
them.
for not.
Gotcha.
I will, I think I might have mentioned this at the last meeting, and I know a few of us weren't here, and I can't remember who was and who wasn't, but as a general rule, and I don't want to put words in the solicitor's mouth, but he did validate what I've also said, is that we can pretty much do in charter any change that you can think of, right? If it is ratified by the General Assembly. We can actually change anything you want if it doesn't run up against another generally applicable law. But if it does, so if there is a generally applicable law and this would go against it, there is a chance, and I would suggest, and I'm not sure if this is what you're getting at, but there's a concern that I have, that we might need to consider whether the General Assembly would be willing to make a special act, which is what this is if it's ratified, and it's just, or if it would go against that. And I might have shared the story where, and I might have the town wrong, but I think it was Johnston, where there was a charter requirement which required the solicitor in that town to represent the school committee in that town. And the charter carried the day, and then the General Assembly changed the generally applicable law to correct that. So I've been, I think, jealously guarding the powers of this commission and of the town's people to change their charter, but bear in mind that if it goes up against a generally applicable law, you can't count on it as for sure sailing through. And I don't know what the odds of that would be, but. Who did I interrupt? Was it Jeff? Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to clarify, the language that Richard has proposed, I think, does need work. I think we all know that. But I have some proposals somewhere in my list, and the dividing line that I seem to be hovering around for the language is on these contracts is if they're collectively bargained. That's, I think, and I just want to share that. So we were talking about language, union member, collective bargaining, I think, might be, when we actually get into the mechanics, into the language, if we do, collective bargaining, I think, might be the way to corral this.
Okay, so, Richard, what's your pleasure? We can take no action, this stays alive. It's going to get voted on again no matter what. We can look for a motion to continue, which means it stays alive, but it has the full freight of the commission behind it, or you can ask for a motion of tentative approval or rejection. It is your choice.
Tentative approval.
Okay, so Richard's made a motion that this commission tentatively approve proposal ID, sorry,
40.
40,
40.
collection and distribution of union fees. Again, this is a tentative approval only. It would stay alive, and what that would do is that would encourage all of us to continue to review and study and continue engaging with our constituents. Certainly encourages the sponsor to continue building the case, and it also instructs all of us, but in particular Donna and me and the secretarial team, to continue to work with some of our government colleagues on mechanics and legal review. Will there be a motion on the tentative approval?
Second, I'll second it.
I'm sorry, the second. We have a second. All right. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further debate on that motion to tentatively approve number 40?
The only thing I want to add is that with number 40, that it also has an attachment. It's not just 40, it has an added paperwork. Explanation should be with it.
You're suggesting this that was handed out
That
tonight?
it be with 40 as part
Yeah, that
of.
was one of my questions. We start to compile all this
Sure.
information for
Yeah.
each one of our
Yeah.
proposals, right? It should be collected someplace.
I want it to be part of 40, like
Yeah, I do too.
the third page or
And I think
attached
probably
to
we
it
should
or
update
stapled to it
Jeff's
or-
spreadsheet.
I think as a matter, especially at a preliminary stage, remember, let's say even in January and February, there's a formal, more binding vote. There will yet, that even isn't the last vote, because then we will literally draft the wording changes to the charter and probably proposed ballot questions. I think Nancy is going to be running point on that. So I think any documentation, particularly if it's coming from the sponsor, unless a member makes an objection otherwise, you could consider it as part of the package. And we would actually, when we send another letter off to the solicitor, I would include this in that review, especially at the preliminary stage.
Right,
Okay.
that's, okay, my question is answered. Yeah, the temporary, what did you say you wanted, Richard? Tentative?
Yep,
Okay.
we have a motion and a second
Okay.
to tentatively approve. This is non-binding. You'll be all free to change your votes later if you want. And you don't have to, this is not the final word. Any further discussion? I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor of the tentative preliminary approval? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ayes. Are there any opposed? I see no opposed. And are there any abstentions? I see 3 abstentions. We're going to need the names, Mr. Secretary, on, where are you getting into?
I-
Yep. When we have a non-unanimous vote, we have to have the names noted in the minutes. So we have
All right.
a 6-0-3 vote with
Three.
Coulter, Lopes, and
Lopes.
Fougere.
Fougere, sorry, it was one of you two.
Coulter.
Abstaining.
Okay.
That motion passes 6-0-3. Thank you. Moving on now to item 7B, number 41, Richard Rahm, limit labor negotiations. Same drill, back to you.
Okay, I got another handout. This one's, I won't spend as much time on this one. It's It's a much bigger proposal, and I've done a lot of research on it. So tonight, what I'm going to do is show you the magnitude of the issue, not necessarily come up with how we should proceed, but just the magnitude of the issue. And I say why the change is needed. The town labor negotiations need to limit contract items such that the town can control cost and performance of its labor force. In reading through the 12 contracts that I've read through, most of the individual contracts are very simple, but they have items in there too that need to be moved to a policy. Now, I'm not suggesting that we eliminate any of these things. All I'm suggesting is that they need to be moved to policy such that our town and our school department can adjust these things as need be, as may come up from time to time from, say their budgets that they receive. They may need to do things, special circumstances. There's all kinds of reasons to adjust your policies. And if you have these items in a contract, you can't adjust them. It's now a matter of contract, and you can no longer adjust them. So in order for our town to get control on cost and performance of its labor force, I think a lot of these things have to come out. And what I did here is I went through the union contracts, and I went through the police, went through the teachers, and then the office workers here, and then some of the truck heavy equipment operators. And as you can see, there's a lot of things that they include in here, such as the deduction for credit union and checkoff, non-discrimination, working conditions, workload, badge numbers. The police have in their contracts how badge numbers are to be given out. There's seniority algorithms. In the case of a seniority algorithm, I really don't have a problem with that if it's used to determine your wage and your salary. Many times the seniority, I say many times, every one of them, the seniority algorithms are used to determine the layoff sequence and the callback sequence. There's things in there such as health services, the police union have divorce decrees, HSA payments, student riders, sick leave, bereavement pay, volunteering VIN checks. The police even have something for bicycle patrol. And this list goes on, and it's quite lengthy, as you can see. In the case of health insurance, forget which one, oh yeah, medical and dental coverage, number 14. In those contracts, I think 3 out of 4 of them specify what policy. Blue Cross Blue Shield, what the deductible is gonna be, and it goes right down the line. If that is in a contract, and you have a budget, and you need to make budget, and that policy is just astronomically high, you can do nothing about that. But if it was in policy, then you can begin to negotiate that. To negotiate with the healthcare provider, all right? And that gives the town some leeway to do this, all right? When I worked in the labor force, it was always understood that the health care was a matter of policy. And my employer could change it at any time, and has, right? The employer has to understand that he must remain competitive. In order to get reasonable people, he must remain competitive. So he's not necessarily going to say, oh, I'm just gonna buy the cheapest, most lax medical coverages I can get. Well, you're not gonna have a labor force then. But at least they have the power to change that, and it's up to them. In this case, it would be up to the town council and the school committee. What do they wanna do with their medical and dental coverage? It's a matter of policy, and they can change it, okay? And it could be very dangerous to change it. In the case, in what I have seen, when they have done that, in my experience, sometimes they would get people resigning and going to other companies, and that's the chance you take. So just because we say we've moved it into policy doesn't mean that we're not going to provide it. I think if you want a good police, good teachers, a good management of our town, you would come up with a very reasonable healthcare. However, I don't want it in the contract, because if it's in the contract, I can't do anything about it. And that's the main, and then as far as seniority, as far as layoffs and callbacks go, layoffs should be a function of your value to your company or your town, and the price that the town is paying for that. And that is all up to the individual. You always want to become a better employee. It does nothing but benefit yourself. Even though that you may not be getting as much recognition and money as you may want, your town, when it comes to, your town or your business, when it comes to layoffs, they're gonna start figuring out who provides for us and who doesn't, and who's costing us money. It should not be in the contract. It should not be a function of seniority. It's a function of value to your business or your town. And therefore, I think it should come out of the contract. So, what I'm looking for here is a continuation, because this is just huge. It's just enormous. What things do we think we ought to take out of here? What things should stay in here? For sure, wages and salaries. That's what unions negotiate for. Their compensation. Also duration. How long the contract. That's all I'm sure of right now. Right.
Okay, so if I read you right, you don't want any of these things to be negotiated in the contract so that the town will stay flexible.
You're not reading me right. I just put all these things down here and I said, this is what's in the contracts.
Yeah.
Right? Now, right now, all I know that I want to stay in there is wages and duration.
Okay.
But I'm open for, there were some things like stipends. There's a couple places in the contract where the police have money that they're given for their uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of your benefit, is that part of your compensation package? Maybe. All right. And maybe you should be able to negotiate for that.
Yeah, but you want the control or the negotiator to be the town rather than the union? Is that what you're saying?
I want to limit negotiations. I want to take it off the table. We will not negotiate these things. These things become a matter of policy.
Okay, so policy is, as it sounds like to me, is a set of rules that someone would come up with, maybe us, maybe the town council, that would pertain to vacations.
Right,
Right.
right.
Okay.
In the case of, say, the school, I think the school might just simply say, whatever's in the contract, we're just gonna move it into policy. And that's fine, I don't have a problem with that. Now the school department understands, well, you know, maybe we can't afford Blue Cross Blue Shield for all of our members, okay? Maybe we're gonna go with Harvard Healthcare or something, right? But it gives them power. It gives the school committee and the town council the power to adjust and control our costs.
Okay, Donna and
I
then
just
Jeff.
have one
Yep.
thing. All right, I can concur as far as when we talk about health coverage, that as a union member, I was not allowed to pick the health coverage. That was whatever the company chose.
Right.
And that's what I had. I mean, then I picked whatever, one I wanted within what they picked. I mean, it wasn't in my contract that I had a specific name of a health company. I had no say on that. So,
If you read through some of these contracts, Donna,
Yeah.
you'd see exact policies, how much your deductible is gonna be, how much your copay is gonna be.
yeah.
It was
Yeah,
spelled out.
it never was in my contract. Yeah.
Jeff?
Thank you. I'm going to support a motion to continue on this. I think it's important, and we haven't had any kind of a labor negotiation workshop. And I can only tell you my understanding of it, having never sat on the school committee or the council. But it's my impression that whatever's in that contract that's being negotiated, like it was there for the last 2 years, you're in year 3, you're negotiating the next year, pretty much that's your starting point for the next year, okay? So it's important to understand that the power of the negotiator on the town side is perhaps somewhat limited because the opposing side, the union, is saying, well, we have that now, we want to keep that. So that's like your starting point. And so if this item were to grow into something that said that these things can't be negotiated and they're a matter of policy, then what that means is that when eventually it goes into effect and the new contracts are negotiated, it might mean that unlike that being the starting point by definition, and many times goes on to eternity, all of a sudden, it's no longer the starting point, and it's in play for maybe looking things at more of a total cost of the contract or something like that. So I want to point out that I think my observation is that the last year's contract, or the last 3 contract, the one they're negotiating, that's just your starting point. And so this would have a chance of changing that and giving the town negotiators a different starting point. And I think maybe that's one way to look at it. So, anyway,
Great,
my
thank you,
2
Jeff.
cents.
Did you have something?
I just sort of wanted to add one thing and I will also support the motion to continue, but when you think about what a lot of these things are, and you can argue that falls into benefits, but if you look historically, I mean, I remember when businesses didn't provide health insurance, but all of a sudden, the culture at that particular time was, oh, if you don't offer health insurance, you're not going to get somebody to come to work for you. But there needs to be flexibility because times change, costs change, and so I agree with, I don't know how you'd structure it. I understand what you're trying to get at, and it'd be probably tricky language, but I think it should offer some flexibility.
Sounds like there's support from the motion to continue. Is that your motion? So made. All right. Is there a second on the motion to continue?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to continue item 41, limit labor negotiations. Any further discussion of that motion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion to continue, this means it stays alive, and of course, we'll come back for formal vote. Any opposed? Any abstentions? It's 9-0 on the motion to continue. Thank you, Richard. Next up is item 7C on the agenda, that is proposal ID number 25 by Nancy Driggs, 8 consecutive year budget committee limit. Nancy?
I think my reasoning that I put down, I should recheck it, but I believe it was that I don't want to limit it. It's a 4-year term, and I agree with that. I don't have any problem with that. I do think that an 8-year consecutive term will allow more people hopefully to get involved and participate, learn about committees, and not just get the same people over and over again, although I could make an argument, if the people are good, you may want to keep them. But that was my reasoning. It's partly to diversify and get more people involved. And I think that's been, whether it's on commissions or committees in town, that's an ongoing effort that I think everybody sort of feels a need for. So that's where it came from.
Try to keep this at 5 minutes. Any discussion? Any questions? We, our last meeting, we did vote preliminarily to reduce the size of the budget committee. Was that 11 to, took it down to 9, not
Nine.
7.
Right.
Does that impact this at all?
I
Just
have
wondering.
I have a point here.
Oh, go ahead.
I think 25 is not matching. A consecutive, there's conflicting language in this. It says budget committee member change, and within it, it's talking about 8 consecutive years, but then it's talking about 7 members of the town council and experience. Am I just reading that wrong? It's a requested change, that one
I
there.
think that was from the other one. I think somehow that got.
Did it, there's an error?
I
Okay.
believe.
All right, I just wanted to, because the next one matches the
Correct.
top one. Okay,
Correct.
all right.
So would this be the only, so as we sit here today, there are no elected or appointed members of the government that have any term limits? So I think that's right. There's no term limits now.
Right.
In this I'm just curious, this would apply only to the budget committee?
It looks like it.
It didn't,
Yeah.
did we
Now-
also kill
Well,
some term?
I had 2 proposals in 13 and 14, and they had gone up for discussion, and I moved to reject them last week, at which time we had discussion and whatnot, and they were, the commission followed my lead and rejected them. So if this is approved, it's going to stand out there alone, as just as a point of reference.
Okay.
I know Richard had a pretty passionate, I remember it, I don't want to ask you to restate it, but it is certainly, if you want to
Takes
speak.
choice away from the voter.
Yeah, yep. And I struggle with that piece of it. So,
Yeah.
I'm not, if,
It does a lot of good things, and Donna
Yeah, yeah.
expressed it very well, all the wonderful things that could come out of term limits.
But
It
to
comes
just,
at the cost of,
right,
of voter choice.
Right.
And I, that's why I voted for
I
Jeff's
just feel
motion.
it should be uniform. If it's, I mean, if
Yeah.
we're going to move that way, it should
I
be
tend to
uniform. You
agree, too.
can't just do it to one particular, it would have to be town council on down.
I agree.
And since we've rejected some of them, it doesn't make any sense to just have this outlier being.
So Jeff, did you ask for a motion to reject or to withdraw?
Yeah, I moved to reject it.
Because of the voter choice primarily?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
forget all my reasons, but they're on tape somewhere.
Yeah.
It's up to you. It's up to you.
We can leave it open administratively and take no action, or what's your pleasure?
I frankly, I'm not super tied into it, and I do agree with Richard Rahm's voter choice argument. And I had frankly forgotten that we had rejected, not just, so I would move to reject it. I'm not strong on this one.
I'll second that.
We have a motion to reject. It would be tentatively rejection. We'll be taking that vote again, and certainly you're all free to change your vote. That's okay. Don't be ashamed of changing your vote. That suggests that you've been thoughtful and deliberative and persuaded by somebody, so.
I'm persuaded
Again,
by voter choice.
we're just doing this for the sake of efficiency.
Mhm.
Is there any further discussion or other motions or proposed motions to amend on a motion to reject number 25 by Nancy Driggs, which would impose an 8 consecutive year limit on the Budget Committee and the Budget Committee only? Second call? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. Those are voting, the ayes are voting to reject, preliminary rejection on number 25. All those in favor of the motion reject. Any opposed? We have one opposed. Any abstentions? Okay, that's 8-1. The motion to reject carries. Mr. Clark is opposed. Thank you, Nancy. Okay, at this time, I'd like to ask the commission to entertain a motion to amend item 8A. We are done with preliminary voting. We are back to discussion only. I'm going to try, unless there's an objection from the commission, to keep debate at 1 hour, a full hour, but no more than an hour, on agenda item 8A. That is 4 different proposals, all bearing upon the very hot topic of casino gaming revenue, casino property taxes. We have a proposal number 1 by Jeff Karen. We have proposal number 55 and number 56 by Bill Lopes, number 59 by Nancy Driggs. And I'd like to ask that we amend this item for discussion only to include ID number 72 to taxpayer rebate of casino gaming revenue, which was acknowledged at item 4B, and also the newly added item 4E, which is, as far as I can see, almost the same thing, but with a different percentage from Nancy, by Nancy Driggs. May I have a motion to add those 2 proposal IDs, again, for discussion only, together with the other 4 casino-related items on 8A?
One of them was Nancy's that she proposed tonight. What was the other one?
Donna's, which was already introduced at item 4B, ID number 72.
So we need a motion for, oh yeah, so I'll move both of those, yeah.
Okay.
Because they're not in this section, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But one of them's completely new and one of them's not in this section. So I'll move both of those.
That's right. May I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Think we have a second. Any further discussion or action? All right, may I have a vote, please? Just to add 2 items to the agenda for discussion purposes only. All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. All right, so here's what I'd like to suggest. I'd like to suggest we spend the next hour talking about these 6 proposals. And you've heard from Donna and you've heard from Nancy. So what I'd like to suggest this. I'd like to ask Jeff to just briefly introduce, 1 to 2 minutes, your proposal ID number 1. Then I'd like to turn the microphone over to Bill to briefly introduce 55 and 56. And now you have 6 potential proposals on the table. Then I'd like to put Jeff on the spot, because he's been triaging these, to just try to explain, the waterfront, the differences, the variations. And once that is done, I'm going to honor my promise to Ray and Donna and let them kick off debate. Is there any objection to that flow? And once we'll have a free-flowing debate for 1 hour. I'd like to save the last hour of this meeting to at least approach some of the other topics. Okay. So Jeff, can you just briefly review item number 1?
Yes, you'll note it was item number 1 when I submitted the 20 initially back in July or August. And it's simply language to ensure the use of casino revenue, tax and gaming revenue is approved by Tiverton voters. And so I kept it very broad, and I know for myself, it's a campaign prong that I ran on, that people would get to decide how to use the money, and so how this money should be used. And so that can happen in different forms. It can happen through our FTR process. It can happen in all different forms. But certainly, I anticipate the opportunity. That's my intention, is that people get to vote on it, and so on how it gets used. So I'll just keep it brief.
Okay, thank you. Bill, do you want to just kind of reorient us, and then you will definitely get more airtime, I promise. But just to make sure we all know what's on the table. These are, you've got 2 there, right? 55, at least 2 as
Right.
we've triaged them. You may have others out there.
Yeah, 55, I think, is the key one for me. Basically, what I was looking at was establishing 3 equal designated accounts for the town use of the gaming revenue. And the 3 categories that I was looking at was 1, capital improvement, and I think we've heard from a number of people, even today, about the importance of capital improvement and having some type of designated fund account. The second area that I would like to have a designated account would be for tax and debt reduction. And that would help us to make sure that we are moving the town in a direction of further affordability and also bringing us into a more favorable financial level of indebtedness. And then the third item I had was really to have an equal amount. This is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 into the general fund, and without any designated application. And I would also be looking at making sure that the spending in those accounts was limited to its designated revenue category, and making sure that there's no sharing of dollars from one category to another. I think that based on what we heard at the last meeting from the treasurer, I think that a separate capital account makes a lot of sense. It also unburdens the tax levy, because right now, as she told us, any capital requirements get put into the overall budget and in turn affect the tax levy. So those are the 3 areas. I avoided the temptation to go into more than 3. I think these are broad enough categories with, a justified need for the town. And it also ensures that we're not going to have any gamesmanship going on with people moving monies around or using some of these monies for other categories. So that is number 55. And then 56 was really to make sure that we have a rigorous capital improvement process. I understand that the treasurer does have a list of capital improvement projects. I did not get the sense, and I agree that more research is necessary, but I didn't get the feeling that somebody had rigorously gone through these proposed capital improvement projects to assess their total utility to the town, the affordability, and also to make sure that we can come up with a prioritized list of capital improvement projects. So that was the intent of 56, to bring more rigor to that process and have that list maintained by the treasurer. So I think that summarizes those two.
That's just perfect, thank you. And I'm sorry, Nancy, I also wanted to ask you on number 59, did you want to just briefly remind us on
That was-
59?
That was basically just to make clear what I think is clear, but to make specifically clear, that the section of 1214, which deals with all fees, penalties, payments, and miscellaneous sources of revenue, shall be transmitted to the town treasurer to go into the general fund. And in my mind, that, to me, it's obviously would include casino gaming revenue. However, as I think I explained during the early days of the casino subcommittee formation by the town council, it seems that a different position was taken that, which never occurred to me you could, that maybe it wouldn't include the gaming revenue. So I just wanted to make it very clear that that word revenue includes the casino gaming revenue.
Okay, thank you. So I was going to put Jeff on the spot, but he wisely, so what I think you have here, and he'll correct me.
He's ready.
Okay, so we have 6 proposals. One of them, as I've heard, is to make very clear that the voters will vote on the disposition of those funds. We've heard 2 proposals earlier tonight that would directly rebate some of the casino gaming funds to the taxpayers, either in whole or in part. We have a proposal on the table that would trifurcate essentially the funds into capital versus unrestricted fund versus tax reduction. We also have a proposal that would require more specificity and detail on capital items. And we have a proposal, which Nancy just summarized, which makes crystal clear that the status quo includes the gaming revenue under 1214. So I think you have quite a few proposals. Jeff, you helped triage these, I know with Donna. Do you want to add anything to the six proposals that we're about to kick off discussion of?
I'll just add that no, I'll just let it be. You did a good job covering it. I'll just let it be.
Thank you. Okay, Ray, back to you. Do you have any, you want to kick us off here, and we have plenty of time.
You want me to start the cat fight?
Well, certainly a hot topic, so I figured with the.
Microphone.
The only comment I
Microphone.
Oh.
Try to use our mics. Yeah, thanks.
The only comment I have is approved by the town electors, that's fine, directly by the town of Tiverton electors, not by the Tiverton electors electing the town council, which then spends the money. That's what I think you mean. So if we put directly approved by the Tiverton voters, would that work for you?
Oh, absolutely. That's what I meant.
Okay,
That's on number 1.
yeah. Okay, and I think that's all. Oh, no, there was the proposal number 55, Bill. You seem to me anyway, that you wanted 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 into each of your little categories. Is it, you want that solid as to 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, not a penny more, not a penny less?
Well, basically, the 1/3, 1/3 formula was, I was not really picking any winners or losers here amongst these 3 categories. So I was just trying to evenly distribute it.
Okay, so if you don't want to pick any winners or losers, why do you say 1/3, 1/3, 1/3? And then if you don't want to pick any winners or losers, it sounds to me like you just have no opinion on which one should be more important than the other.
Not necessarily, Ray. I just don't think, given the anticipated level of revenues, that we really need to kind of nitpick this to death, where, one might get 30%, the other might get 40, or whatever. I mean, I think that, we're looking at roughly $1 million apiece
Yep.
for these three items, and I think that's plenty of money to, especially on a multi-year basis, to basically aggressively attack these particular categories.
So, my question is then, the one-third, 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 there's two parts to it. Would it be in perpetuity? And there could be some scenarios where capital improvement could use a little bit extra, and unreserved general fund might not need enough. And is there a way that you're gonna address that? Or do you still, you like that solid one-third, one-third, one-third period?
I've been thinking about the unreserved general fund category as being one that really does not restrict how that is allocated, and I don't think I've got the right language in here right now.
I see where you're going there. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, yeah, exactly, okay.
But,
Yep.
but thank you for clarifying that for me.
And I had no comment on 56, and what was the other one? Oh, Nancy's, we already did those.
I do think, just to state the obvious, these are mutually exclusive proposals. You can't support all of these, right? Do we all understand that? Okay. So, okay. I'm sorry, did you want to jump? Okay. All right, well, so let me just, I thought there'd be, oh, go ahead.
I see these proposals as having some conflicts with each other.
You want a microphone?
I see these proposals as being in conflict, and maybe you can help me out understanding, maybe they're not in conflict. But Jeff's first proposal, language to ensure the use of casino revenue is approved by the Tiverton electors. And then I look at Safe Bills, number 55, and we're just talking about it. It's one-third, one-third, one-third. Taxpayers didn't vote on that.
Right. That's just it. These, you can't support them all. These are actually.
Right,
yeah.
right. So.
Now Nancy's might be close, I mean, not, you tell me, but I think Nancy's first one, you actually have now two. So you tell us. But the 1214 default, I view that as the status quo, which really means all 100% would be voted on through the financial town referendum, which
Right.
might be what Jeff's number one at least
That's what-
began
yeah.
with as a baseline. Did we agree on that much?
Yeah, I think if no action is taken, and in the current status of the charter, I think it's important to understand that if action is taken and the voters in November disapprove whatever is proposed, put it either way, the bottom line is, if this charter in this regard stays unchanged on November 9th, or whatever the day after the election is, then the current read is all miscellaneous revenue goes into the general fund. We have a clarification of that, just to reemphasize it. And at that point, history has shown that it would all be part of the, available to be part of the FTR budget process. There are some concerns, certainly, from what we hear from other bodies in town that are discussing this, that it may not be available. But generally speaking, the money does get that far, it appears, into the general fund, and under normal circumstances would be available for the annual budget process. Does that help clarify? That's the status quo. Should, let's just say, no proposals come forward on this, or should proposals come forward no matter what they are, and they be defeated in November, then we're back to what we have now for a charter, which would appear to be what I just said.
Right, so you have about these 6 proposals that are on the table, and I think maybe your second one, now you tell, we almost could set that aside for the moment, which was the listing of the capital items. So if we just, I mean, that's important, but we could just sort of put that on the side. You have 5 that deal with the disposition of casino gaming revenue. I'm not sure any of these would do anything differently on the property tax piece. But those 2 are somewhat the same. But then we have 2 other proposals that would take a fraction of that. Donna's had, I think, a 25% fraction, and Bill has a fraction of either 1/3 or 2/3, depending, I guess, we can talk about that, but some fraction that would take it out of the status quo process and would then add it to a capital improvement fund, which, not to taint these discussions with what the town council subcommittee's been doing, has had some conversation about that as well. Now, so let's talk, so there's some similarity there. That's some fraction, and then maybe that's the conceptual point we should kick around a little bit, is how do we feel about that? How do we feel about some fraction being taken out of the ordinary course of order? Now, do we agree at least that those 2 proposals have that concept in common?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
I'll share my viewpoint, having been number 1, that people need to vote on it. If some money's taken out of the process like that, I mean, I could be swayed to be okay with that as long as the people get to vote on it. Because one of the risks becomes, obviously, that once the money's out of that process, it's not under the scrutiny of the budget committee, et cetera, and we could get into candy store scenarios. And so I think that the full stop position on that would be as long as the voters get to approve all the buckets, then that's okay. Then I could perhaps live with that.
Can I ask for clarification when you say approve all the buckets? So if you have a capital improvement bucket, would you envision the definition of what goes in, what kind of capital things are included in that bucket so that the taxpayers know where they're going? Because one of the scenarios I get worried about is if you have a capital improvement bucket, and let's say it even delineates a certain number of what's considered capital improvements, what still stops the budget committee from being confronted with the police, the fire, who knows what, coming up with other capital stuff that will now be add-on capital that's not in that capital improvement fund, but it's still taking away from the affecting the tax levy because it is in the FTR.
Well, those things that are in the FTR would be under the current budget process scrutiny and would go through the budget committee and go through the
But
FTR.
those include capital.
Well, okay, and so, but if they're prioritized and if they can get approved by the taxpayers, then they do. Now, and if, just like they do now, if there's the desire for something and if it eventually passes the vote of the people, it's approved. Now, but there's a situation where so I don't view that as any change. We still have the existing process to discriminate for items in the annual budget. The question is, what you asked the question was a definition. I mean, I think that there be a broad definition of what capital things are. You define what that is broadly, okay? And then, there's this question of if there are buckets. I think what we're talking about is a percentage of money gets diverted to that bucket. Maybe I'm just, and then what I'm sort of hearing. And then I think the question is, well, where's the voter approval? Well, that can all be, in the charter change, or maybe there's voter approval, as the money gets expended. Some people want a playground, other people want, a new rec center. So I'm just saying, like, the voter approval can come in different flavors, and it's a question of how much does the charter carve out, as that gets diverted to this other capital bucket
Correct.
or
And
not.
I guess my concern is that it is a broad enough definition of capital that will now be covered by the casino gaming revenue, that it will remove that burden of capital expenses, some of that burden of $400,000 of capital expenses that normally occur, take away and lower and raise the tax levy, because it is in that budget.
Well, I think that, exactly, and I've wrestled with language, and if you watch the different bodies in town wrestling with this, there's certainly been discussion that capital items that you're referring to, the 400,000, get thrown over to there. So the question's going to be, if this body were to, deliberate on this further, then would it have an explicit statement that says, all roof repairs shall be from this account? Like, you could, what this body maybe would propose is language that actually directs it all to come out of that, but so, or maybe not. I mean, I haven't thought about how I feel about that. I've certainly contemplated the concept. But, so is that what you're getting at?
Yes,
That-
it is
that-
what I'm getting
yeah.
at. There's sort of the basis that I wanted to throw out, an option of just keep all the capital in the FTR for voters to approve as it is, including the capital and revenues, and give the taxpayers the 100% rebate.
Right, which is where you get to.
Right.
Right, you get to the
Right.
proposal that you
Right.
effectively made tonight, right.
Right.
Well, if I understood the treasurer correctly, the last meeting, I think she said because we do not have a designated capital improvement account, that any capital improvement requirements come out of the basic budget. And that in turn ultimately affects the tax levy. But if we were to have a separate capital improvement account funded by this gaming revenue, that would take that burden off of the general account and have an effect of reducing the tax levy,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So I think that's a beneficial thing.
Yeah.
Secondly,
If it gets removed.
Just, do you mind if I just jump in to say
Yes.
that, I think this is germane, that the budgeting process routinely does restrict through the FTR, either the budget proposals itself or the resolutions, essentially accomplishes that same thing through resolution. So it's not clear to me that we need to do that in the charter, in fact. So I'll let you finish your thought.
what,
but-
to come up with a separate bucket?
Right, I
for
think the
capital
voters have the
improvement?
power as we sit here today
Yeah.
to make those restrictions, and in fact, they do. The one that comes to mind is paving and drainage, and actually, I think there's an omnibus resolution that that goes through all of the capital line items, and says they have to stay in there. It may even be something on pay-as-you-throw. So, again, that's just it's kind of in the weeds mechanically, but
Okay, well, maybe we need to,
Yeah.
or I need to review it more. The importance of that project number 56, Nancy, I think gets at some of what you
I think
were,
it does too. It
you were,
does. It's
you
all-
were
yeah.
pointing out, to make sure we got the right priorities established for those projects that would be put forward in the current year.
you know what, it might be, just to come back to that, what I described is accurate, but it could then be unwound, and that may be how we reconcile what we heard from the treasurer with what I just said, is that a future, if it's not in the charter, a future, as you would put here in 56, a future FTR could unwind the resolution. I think that's how that would solve that.
Okay.
So I just want to, at the halfway point, I just want to, and then I'll come back to you, but just the halfway point, I want to see, is there anyone in the public that wants to be heard on this? We have about another half hour of debate on this. Anybody want to jump in? No? Okay. I'll ask again in about 20 minutes. All right, who was next? Jeff? Ray?
You can take Ray.
Okay, thank you.
Nancy, your proposal, what number was it, 72 or 73?
Whatever, the new one.
Whatever, the new ones. You suggest through that proposal that 100% of the revenue from the casinos go back to the taxpayers. Now it sounds like you're arguing that you're abandoning that and you're gonna put some of that money into capital funds and whatever else. That's what it sounds like to me.
No, I'm not abandoning it. I have concerns if we cannot effectively come up with language that makes sure that if something does go into a capital improvement, that it is broad enough that it removes those items from what would be in the budget capital stuff, so that it's not a candy store of just, oh, now we can get 10 new fire engines, and oh, by the way, we'll keep the need for the new roof and the new stuff on the burden of taxpayers. And I don't know if there's an answer for that, so that's my concern. And I thought one simple way then to do it, which we sort of ran on, that this would provide tax relief for the taxpayer, let them get the benefit of the casino revenue and still get to vote on the budget that comes forward. So they are going to be voting on capital. They're going to vote on everything that currently is in the budget, but they will get the relief that the casino will offer.
It sounds, for some reason, it sounds like you're spending the money twice. No. Is it me?
I don't think
Well,
so.
I think, Ray, I think that I can sit here and say, wow, I really like that proposal that Nancy just put forward. And I can sit here and say, because it's, it's literally a check at the end of the year gets written and everyone gets a check in the mail. And I like that, 100%. Now I can spend the money how I want and every family can how they want. I can sit here and say that. I can also sit here and say that I like the proposal, I like a version of the proposal Bill put forward, okay, Bill Lopes did. And that's for further discussion. But, so I can sit here and I haven't made my mind up yet, so I'm only gonna, I don't, and if I'm speaking for Nancy, I don't know, but, I mean, I like multiple proposals on the table right now, so I think for you to, I think you need to understand that there's a lot out there now, different
Yeah.
ideas, and so, like, I like ones that can't, I like proposals on the table right now that are mutually exclusive, and I certainly wouldn't want to be held right now to pick one, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that, I get that.
So let me just kind of remind me, what's the question I like to ask, Greg? What is the problem we're trying to solve? So why has this gotten so complicated? What's wrong with this basic proposal that this should be treated like any other source of revenue and let the voters decide? Why are we, remind me why we're tying ourselves in knots, maybe we should put, you were willing to take 25%. I assume that would still mean, well, you tell me, does the 25% still get voted on by the people?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, considering, what I've heard from the casino subcommittee, I got very concerned that the taxpayer was getting lost in the shuffle. Most of them wanted tax relief, so I decided to put my proposal in to put the foot in the door, to kind of keep the door open a little bit to protect the taxpayer from all these different buckets and everyone, having a Christmas list. And I just got very concerned that the right of the taxpayer to have the money within the FTR wasn't guaranteed. So I decided to try and guarantee the taxpayer a refund. What would I really like? I'd like the money to go into the FTR and budget process, but some of the things I've heard and watched and been to makes me question that's going to happen. That was the reason why I put my proposal in. But I fully expect the 25% to go through the FTR process. So I don't want, what I don't want is them to spend money on capital expenses at budget time, and then they consider the other money to be more money to spend. That's what I'm concerned with.
That's what I'm concerned
And that's not helpful at all, because now we're getting into a spending problem that we can't rein in. You know, so
I guess
anyway.
there's some argument to be had that, what's nice about a rebate is that the government doesn't start to rely on it. Because where I sit, I get a little worried. I mean, I don't know how many casinos are up in Massachusetts. There's another one maybe coming in Taunton, and if you let the people have the money back, the source of money, but is it fair to, I'm just trying to get a sense of I don't know, have I heard is there anybody against voter approval? And I take it a rebate also means essentially voter approval, right? You get your check and.
I would say that's the ultimate voter
That's the
approval, if you
ultimate
get a
voter
check in the
approval,
mail.
right? You can then,
You can't argue with that voter
spend that
approval.
on your family, you can donate it back to the government if you want, or a charity of your choice, rather than the government picking your charities for you. So some of these would have the ultimate voter approval. Some would have the voter approval in the ordinary course through the FTR. Some might take fractions of that and have voter approval, but within boundaries, such as a definition of a capital account. Is there anyone, Bill, even your proposal, at the end of the day, is there anybody on this commission that would tolerate, maybe that's not the right word, but is everybody here looking for voter approval? There might be some constraints.
Direct voter approval, as Ray pointed out.
Direct voter approval, well,
Yeah, through the FDR process,
Okay.
right? Is that what you're saying?
so I think that's what I am saying, but that's a great question. Does anybody else have a different version of voter approval in mind?
Well, I view there's three different, I mean, I've thought about this a lot, obviously, and I see three different ways to have voter approval. One is, one level of voter approval is through the charter change itself. And so the voter, that is a form of voter approval. It's a one-time thing. And in that scenario, now I'll layer this into the other two. In the actual charter change, if there was going to be a diversion of some money to a capital account, then maybe that voter approval sets that percentage, 1/3 or 1/4 or whatever the number is. So that's a voter approval that says, this is the charter change, and we're going to divert of this money over to this other place, okay? And this is the scope of that other place, and so on and so forth. And then there's still a layer of voter approval, and so the remaining amount of money, I think the assumption is it would go through the annual budget process, and it would get voter approval annually. So now, there's another layer of voter approval as well, though, where you've got money coming in, and I think in Donna's scenario, in the rebate scenario, she's got a minimum of $750,000 per year going into this capital improvement fund. So after 2 years, it's $1.5 million sitting there, if none gets spent. So now the question is, how does that money get spent? And there's another layer of voter approval, in my mind, that I could envision, where, the voters of the town have a say in how that capital fund is spent, okay? So, I mean, we know how much is going in every year, perhaps by an initial charter change vote. It's a vote. And then subsequent to that, as monies are expended from that account, there's a layer of voter approval. And again, I think that is a very important aspect to preventing the candy store scenario, is at the end of the day, the money's going to accumulate. And if there's not a level of taxpayer approval, it's going to get spent in ways that, are not approved. So I don't know if I've answered your question, and I jumped in, but I've thought about the layers of voter approval on this quite a bit. And so there's different nuances to what that really means, as the thoughts start to develop. So I hope that helped people. I don't know if it did, but.
Just one thing I wanted to point out too, because we've heard a lot about, well, the subcommittee has heard a lot about what Lincoln does. But one thing that isn't mentioned, which touches on what Rob just mentioned, and it's a very real problem that these towns potentially can face, and maybe some are facing, that they don't account for volatility of this casino revenue, and all of a sudden, 2 casinos get built in neighboring cities, and this $3 million they thought was coming in is now $1 million, but meanwhile, their government has grown and grown, and they're spending it and relying on it. So what Lincoln does, which is sort of interesting, is they do have a capital improvement fund, and then they have a certain percentage that can go into, I guess, the equivalent of a general fund. But before that happens, before any money is put after the capital, it goes into a reserve account for just that scenario. It sits there sort of like an escrow to protect in case the revenues dry up or disappear or go down, so that they are not all of a sudden stuck with debt expenses or capital expenses that they don't have the money to pay for. So,
That's only a short-time Band-Aid, though. I mean, you may have 2 or 3 years' worth, but if casinos are popping up everywhere, that's not going to solve a long-term problem, yeah.
Yeah, but at least if you have some sort of cushion there, it gives you more time to prepare for, say, austerity. I mean, I think that's a good idea, the way they do that.
The reserve account?
Yeah, a reserve account, then oh gee, look, we only got $1 million this year. Well, we can still fund ourselves with the reserve account, but we have to, at least you have time to plan ahead.
which is
You
why
know?
they do it.
Yeah, that sounds like a fairly good solution for that type of scenario.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, some of my thoughts with all of these things that are being batted around here is, first of all, what we just talked about is having that reserve is, it's good business management, but I think that's something that should be in the hands of the Budget Committee. And that, we're kind of drifting off what we were addressing here. I think a few things that we have to do are to tighten up the wording to make sure the casino money goes into the general fund. And let the Budget Committee do their job and figure out how to spend this, rather than us telling them it has to go here, here, and here. Because if we start putting that into our charter, now from this time forward, or until the next time the charter is revised, they're going to have to adhere to the one-third, or the 25, 75. And things change over the years. The economy changes, and maybe next year is a good year for capital investment because of interest rates or whatever. And next year is a good year to move that money somewhere else. So I don't think the charter should get into that much detail as to where this money needs to go. We have to make sure that it goes into the general fund. We have to make sure that the Budget Committee does their job. And we have to make sure that the FTR is the process by which we approve it. And there is the option to put in alternate budgets. So we've got that too as another way for voters to have an input and to have some checks and balances on whatever the Budget Committee proposes. So I think those are the key issues that we need to address here. And I think we have those proposals on the table. We've hit on these 3 things, those 3 important points already. I just think we have to be careful not to put too much detail in the charter along these lines. As far as Bill's comments about capital improvement process and having a good process for identifying what needs to be replaced and how long a piece of equipment is going to last, I think that's a very important process, but I don't think it's what we're trying to address right now. Maybe that's a separate issue.
May I have the floor? Thank you. I wanted to follow up earlier on a point that Bill made. You just touched on it again, but for the reference of sports fans who follow what's going on in other government bodies, there's a movement afoot to create a specialized committee to make these recommendations of what the town's priorities are in terms of capital. So that's something that, you seem to allude, Bill, that, this changes, this is a big picture, this is a can of worms to figure out. And you just touched on it too, flexibility on this area, moving forward. And I just want to note that, somewhat dovetailing perhaps with this conversation, is that I think that other bodies in town recognize too that we need to somehow have recommendations that make sense, that come into the budget process. So there's actually a discussion to create some sort of a committee to look at the capital needs and rank them and prioritize them and whatnot, which is consistent with Bill. So I just pointing that out, that I do agree that trying to, if you get overly specific, we don't want to do that. And there are other, that's another area of, okay, what are our town priorities? Maybe that's not so much a specific discussion for this body.
So from one former budget committee member to another, remind me why, I mean, isn't that what I just heard from Stephen? Shouldn't the budget committee be exactly that body?
I concur with you. I'm just sharing that other bodies in town, if you follow the news cycles and the meetings, other bodies in town are discussing creating subcommittees, I'll just use that word, whether it's correct or not, exactly, to look at specifically and prioritize the capital needs of the town. Could the budget committee do that? I believe it should be the budget committee personally. But I'm just sharing that others recognize this need for, wow, we got to pay attention to this. And so it could be the budget committee, could be another committee. I'm just sharing with you that.
And so, and again, wearing a sort of a former town council hat, I certainly think the council can create advisory bodies, but it might be, Bill, the type of structure you're putting in here might be something to add to a power and duty of the budget committee, to make sure that, because remember, the budget committee is elected, and they're a big group. In fact, we're trying to make them a little smaller, right? But as we sit here today, there's 11 of them. Even if our proposal were to pass it, this 9 would still be the largest continuously standing body in the town, other than this one that comes up every few years, every 6 years. So I just brought that up because that dialogue there. But
Well, if I could, rather than, going around the edges, what I heard to be, the casino subcommittee, as I understand it, is that the one that's working now is coming to an end? Okay. So now what they're proposing is, because they want to keep all of the money out of the FTR, is that they have a financial advisory committee. And it's just, I don't think you have the budget committee. They're elected. You don't need an appointed committee to decide, and the money should really be in the FTR process for the electors to vote on the budget. And as was brought up, we still have the elector petition to have choice. And so this would be an appointed advisory committee for money they want to keep out of the FTR process. So it is kind of troubling.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that, I know that, I know it would be an appointed group of I think I heard.
It's an idea out there.
It's an appointed group that would, I don't know if they recommend or they have absolute power to determine how the money's spent. And this is for the capital portion, I believe, of the money, I think, only. And, but I'm not sure, I have not heard, I've heard in other venues, about keeping it out of the budgetary process. In this context of this advisory board to prioritize the town's needs, I'm not sure I heard keeping it out of the FTR related to this potentially newly formed commission. I haven't heard that part yet, but I've certainly heard it in other venues. That's my 2 cents.
We just got to, keep listening, figure out what they're doing there with that.
Rob, would we be able to have this casino commission come to give us a preview or a summary of their final conclusions? It seems like we've got some other things of pretty significance going on in the background here that we ought to know a little bit more about. Certainly, looking at the number of proposals we have on this subject. And, Jeff's point, we don't even know what their their mission is and what their commission is.
I think one of the problems is the subcommittee, at least as they verbalized, I think their next meeting in early December is they're planning for it to be their last meeting of the initial casino subcommittee. And they've just signed off on the host agreement, sort of traffic issues, building permits, that kind of thing. And they specifically said, we don't have the ability to make the decision on what the needs of the town are and where to spend it. So they're going to be asking the town council to form an advisory committee that will look into the capital improvement ideas. And as Jeff said, their goal is going to be to prioritize. This committee hasn't even been formed yet. So when you say come before us, I mean, they're going to have to, I would assume they're going to have to advertise for the advisory committee. They're going to have to advertise. They're probably going to, who knows?
Well, and I'll just add that the first subcommittee is advisory to the council. I presume that the second one, when it gets formed, will be advisory to the council, I'm presuming. Maybe they'll have absolute power, I'm not sure, but it's down the road a bit. And those two things I just said, advisory to the council, and then we've been trying for 3 months to get the council here. So I think one of the issues we have in inviting the subcommittee here is that it's advisory to the council, and we have struck out a bit in trying to get the council to tell us what they're thinking. So I just want to, follow up with you, Bill, on that it's not as easy as it seems to extend that invitation.
Yeah, we've been trying, you may remember from our workload, we had hoped to have them here in September, and now it's September, October, November. So we have to keep our work going. At the end of the day, we are the elected Charter Review Commission, but we will certainly continue to invite the old one, the new one, anyone.
Well, I mean, I know that some of us have tended to get into a little bit more detail in some of our proposals, but I believe that is in direct response to the fact that our town council is in a very dysfunctional mode right now. And I'm not sure how soon they're really going to be able to, get the ship stabilized here. And I think, personally, I believe that we have to provide as much guidance as we can in our proposals to recognize that if the town council and its allied commissions or bodies are not as strong as they need to be, that we give them as much guidance and help with our wording in the charter, because I don't think these are normal times. So.
And that's what makes ID, proposal number one so important, that it's the people at Tiverton are deciding what's going on with that money, and we need to make sure that that's clear. That way, financial advisory, boards that are appointed aren't doing just that.
They're advisory, but not absolute, right?
Right.
All right, so I want to we may not need the whole hour. I'm tempted, I'd like to see if we can get to some of these FTR topics, because I think Donna started making the connection of how a lot of this really comes down to some of these FTR and tax issues. But before we do, I want to again invite anyone from the public that would like to comment on any of these 6 proposals or the casino in general.
Yes, Sally Black. So I think I mentioned at the last meeting that the school committee received money from the people, $50,000, to do the study for our capital needs of all 5 schools, down to the doorknobs. Kelly Levesque's right here, she's on the building committee. They meet constantly. The piece we're not considering is the Department of Education also makes us jump through hoops with all this, as Jeffrey knows, and to get reimbursement. So we can get reimbursement from them after we supply everything we need, why we need it, if it's health and wellness, or, safety, will get 40%, if not 35. But that all goes along with this. So as we go on that track, presenting our capital needs to the state and getting approval back for the 35 or 40%, that's what we're doing constantly. And we did present it in a big, huge binder. You were there, Nancy. And then we took out the roofs and boilers as being our priority to keep the kids safe, warm, and dry. And then we'll go on from there, continuously looking at that and seeing what the next priorities are. But in the end, it always has to come to the people, just like the bond just did. In the end, it comes to the voters, and they decide what they're going to do. But that's what we're doing on our side, and it's going on constantly. I think she just had a meeting this week. You have to have a standing building committee for the state to give you anything back. So when we started with that standing building committee, we got a little nervous that people were going to think we wanted more new schools. We said as soon as we say that, they're going to say, oh, no, they want more. No, that wasn't it. That's just part of the whole process. So there is a standing building committee that meets. I just wanted you all to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. I think that really shows how involved some of these decisions make when you have to consider the amount you get reimbursed from the state, and I hadn't even considered that sitting here tonight. And it also shows the importance of flexibility in, to make those changes. Oh, the state just changed that reimbursement. All of a sudden, it looks more attractive. Those things are going to happen. So you do need to keep the process flexible. And I think Sally just made the case for that.
Okay, any other comments from anyone in the public? Okay, hearing none. So I think, unless there's an objection from the commission, don't need to take any votes, but what I would encourage the sponsors to continue to refine their work. Maybe it's time to even put a little pen and paper together, keep outreaching to the other bodies, the constituents. One thing I feel like I heard loud and clear, if we did take a vote, I think it might be 9-0, is that this commission would expect that the voters of Tiverton ultimately, in some fashion or another, or maybe multiple votes, ultimately decide on the disposition of casino money.
Absolutely.
So I think that's an important signal that all of our sponsors and proposals, and those of you that are considering getting other proposals in, we certainly welcome more proposals before the December 31st deadline. I think that's an important takeaway.
Rob,
Oh, sir.
is this an appropriate time to ask if anybody would want to withdraw any of these proposals, or just keep them all open? Or continued, or?
Yeah, well, this is we have the introductions. This is the first touch of discussion, preliminary voting. I don't know if before January we'll be able to reach these. I think we're trying to clear out some of the other ones. Maybe yes, maybe no. I'll leave that to Donna, but I don't know that I'd put anybody on the spot tonight on a withdrawal. And we haven't noticed voting on the agenda, but I'm actually wondering if we're going to get a few more proposals, if this is actually going to quite the opposite. But is that okay?
Are you about to move on to another agenda, the next agenda blip item? Or
I was, yeah. But if you'd like to see some action, go ahead.
Well, no, I don't have action in terms of voting, but I would like to see. I'd like to follow up on what you just said, Rob, in terms of, maybe start putting the pencil to paper on, what language could look like. And so I don't know what those who have sponsored, or if they care to, or I certainly would be willing to do some in certain areas. And I don't know. It's just the pleasure of the committee, I guess, and Rob's the chairman, not me. But I wouldn't mind seeing so if someone wants to put pencil to paper, if Nancy wants to on some of these proposals, or I'd be willing to help. Anyway, I wouldn't mind seeing some, just some straw man language, real early straw man language on some of these things. Because some of these topics, you want to debug over time, and I wouldn't mind seeing that. And even if we scrap them, we may decide no capital fund, but at least we can start to get a feel for what it might look like. Mm-hmm. And so I want to follow up on what you said, and maybe task Nancy to ringlead the people that are good with pens to, to maybe take a stab at it. If something's ready for the next meeting, throw 20 minutes on or not, But
I think that'd be great. I mean, and there may be others like this where there are multiple proposals on a complex and, pretty hot topic, and they're mutually exclusive, where it might be good to ask the sponsors, hey, you don't have to, completely lawyer it up, but maybe it's time to really go, one notch higher on an outline of what sections. For those preliminary proposals, we don't ask people to identify sections, but, maybe once now that you've heard the sense of the committee, we should ask all those to consider language or coming back with a little more. In fact, to boomerang back on you, even your number one is one of the more general, it's very succinct in its conceptual description, but
But for example, my number one, I obviously have thought about it a lot, and I can foresee ways to accomplish that. So I wouldn't mind sharing, some chicken scratch on that. And that's what I guess I'm getting at, is if people want to come forward. We got the ball moving for an hour tonight on this, and I just, as a member of the commission, wouldn't mind seeing the ball keep moving,
Well,
especially since
how
we're all going to
about-
disappear for
And,
Christmas.
It's interesting to note, I've noticed in some of the language you see circulated, things you think are obvious, like me including gaming revenues. I've seen language where they specifically they're going to try to exclude gaming revenues, so by
Language is
inference.
important.
Right. So let me suggest this. I do want to, we published that the December 4th meeting would be mostly, for the public. It seems possible that we won't need that whole time, so maybe we can, if that time is available, continue this on. And then what I'd ask for, maybe to put Nancy on the spot, since you're going to be kind of our drafting
Talk
point
with
person,
Jeff and Donna.
to reach out to Nancy if you need some help sort of thinking through, all right, what section, and Bill, maybe you agree with this idea or not, but just as an example, how would I add to the Budget Committee powers and duties the requirement to develop the type of capital specificity? And knock yourself out, go as wild as you want to, but maybe at least another outline or something. I think we'd all benefit from that. And I might even take it on myself to try to throw together a little table that tries to show some of the distinctions between the 6 proposals. Does that meet the spirit of what?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think we want to try to work as independently as possible for, obviously for, we don't want to, for open meetings reasons on that. But on the other hand, everything we bring forward is like just work product for the next meeting. But we want to keep that in mind, obviously, too. But I think, so Nancy, if you're drafted as the point person, because that is your job, right? You're the docket queen on the budget committee, and you're the charter queen here. So as the secretary of the charter, so if you want to you have certain matters, you have certain issues, like on certain topics, you just have to be careful that you don't communicate with too many people, that's all. You know what I mean? That's all, on any topic, single topic. But I think you can reach out to a stakeholder, certainly, and get the input, so that we can bring something forward to the next meeting, concept, right? I think that's totally wide open to do that, so.
And vice versa. Don't wait for Nancy to call you.
Yeah.
Call Nancy too. I'm obviously happy to help too. Okay, well, I thought that was very helpful. Thank you, everyone, for all your thoughtful input on that. Let's, so we're right on schedule. So let's take on another tough grouping, okay? So let's move to 8B. I'd actually like to suggest, if this makes sense, that we pull 8H into HB. And so what 8B is, and I think Donna kind of teed this up about how the casino money really ties into the FTR process. So let's talk about the FTR process and things that have to do with budgets, all right? And I'm going to suggest we cap this at half an hour of preliminary discussion so we can at least hit 1 or 2 more. But is there any objection to taking 8H, which is the proposal ID number 3, which would automatically place a 0% default increase on the annual FTR budget, and loop that in with all the other ones in 8B?
No.
Where are you getting these numbers?
It's the revised budget, the revised agenda, Ray. So,
Yeah, okay. So,
I was going to make a motion to continue H when and if we got to it, just to continue it straight out.
Where's the 8A?
Okay.
And not really address it
That 8A?
tonight.
that does not tie into B?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, Well, I
Well, I'll
look
make
at
it
B.
easy.
I read B, and I didn't see the word FTR all that much. I saw tax cap kind of stuff more than I saw FTR. So I wasn't going to include H into B. I was going to focus more on how to limit spending separately from the FTR, I guess. So,
Okay. well,
so
you're-
I was going to make, eventually, if we got to H, I was going to make a motion to continue it, is what I
Well,
was
we,
going to do.
yeah, we wouldn't, we're just discussing it anyway, so we
Okay.
wouldn't be voting.
Oh, that's
But-
right, we're
But
not
this is
voting.
easy, because you're the sponsor, so don't even worry about what I just said. Let's just proceed to
This
8B.
is all Jeff.
Yes, well, I think, yeah, there's one in the end. Who's got 42? But, so Jeff, you have a whole variety
I'm
of
sorry,
proposals
yeah.
here, which probably made them easy to triage. So why don't can I suggest you take 5 minutes and try to knock, just
Okay.
reintroduce all of these. Tell us why you see them as a grouping together, and then we'll have 25 minutes of residual debate.
Okay, so
And I apologize, I have to take off to go to work.
you are excused.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Okay, have a good Thanksgiving.
I'll be doing, happy Thanksgiving, I'll be doing lots of reading to catch up.
Okay.
And we're on video now. This is great. So you can.
Yeah.
Catch up.
So, okay, so number one, oftentimes in the town, from time to time, you hear the wording of tax cap. And so the question becomes, and I'll just preface it, what is a tax cap? We know the state has a 4% on the levy tax cap. We know Massachusetts has a 2.5% tax cap, meaning that that's a maximum that the levy can increase. So there's that aspect. So number 4, okay, it just says that, language that establishes a cap. And this was discussed at, the council 5-6 years ago, I remember at one point, and it just sort of never made it and percolated high enough to make traction. Now, another way, though, another way to limit spending and control it is language that ties, say, school funding to metrics such as performance and enrollment. Okay, so that's a little different than capping the levy. That's looking at saying funding's tied to performance enrollment. So another way to control spending is language that limits total compensation increases of unionized employees. So, I could see, this ties in a little bit with the things that Richard Rahm was saying about contracts. And this would be a twist on that where, total compensation can only grow by so much in a contract. And so that does, though, is if you conceptualize some of these things that I'm mentioning is, a union might come in and say, we want a 4% increase. And now the council's got to deal with that, or the school committee's got to deal with that. But if the charter says something different, like if the charter limits it to X% less, then all of a sudden, there's a more favorable starting point, so to speak, in the doctrine. So that's another way to maybe control the taxes in the town. Language to regulate the use amount of police and firefighter overtime. So I'll tell a story, and I'll take 1 minute and tell it. I mean, I sat here as the chairman of the budget committee, and a fire chief came before me and said, he got done saying, I'm finally fully staffed. I had, I'm going to make the numbers up, I had 27 firefighters, and now I have 30. I'm finally fully staffed. They hired me, the 3 new guys I wanted. This is going back 10 years here, so I'm going back in my memory. And then 4 minutes later, the request was, I need more overtime. And I listened to that, and I turned around and said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, I have more firefighters, need more overtime. And I tell this story, and I get perplexed looks like Bill's giving me. But, I mean, this is how the system works. More firefighters means you need more overtime. It goes back to what's in these contracts and entitlements, okay? So I just floated this, number 12, language to regulate the use amount of police firefighter overtime. I mean, this is what's going on, okay? So since we're a Charter Review Commission, is it something we want to think about? But just to give you an idea, I mean, that is ingrained in me from 10 years ago when I sat in Rob's seat as the chairman of the Budget Committee. And I said they tell that story. So language that sets a maximum cap for library grant increases. I mean, the library has declared it's not part of the town through a process that happened a couple of years ago. And, the voters were essentially told that there would be a 10% increase in operating costs. They've gone up 30-some%. In the last couple of years, they've asked for many percent more than was approved by voters. So do we want to give some consideration to the fact that the library gets a grant? I mean, they're not even, by their own declaration, part of the town. Do we want to set a maximum cap on that and just sort of, propose that? Okay, let the voters decide. Language that sets a maximum cap for school department funding from local sources, and you'll note the word local sources. So that would be some sort of a spending cap on that number. And so these all have the same flavor, and I didn't want to, they're all about tax cap concept, okay? And, the tax levy shall not increase by more than X is one way to do it. Another way is to go into the contracts, a little bit on the ROM's idea, and put limitations there. No contract shall be signed with a total compensation increase of more than bang. I don't know the pleasure of the committee, but I do know that tax caps are something that I would support, and that hopefully some version of these topics, could be put forth by the commission. And that's my 2 cents on, and I hope that's a kind of summary of different things we can think about. And that's why they're all triaged together tonight. So Richard, you're the last one though.
Yeah.
So I'll let Richard speak to his, which I triaged with it.
Thank you, Jim. The number 42 is elderly property tax freeze. In further review of this, I'm going to repeal it, or no, we call it reject it.
Withdraw it?
Yeah,
Withdraw it?
withdraw it. It does treat the elderly favorably, where it places a burden on younger property taxpayers. The problem I see with elderly property taxpayers is they're on a fixed income. So it becomes very painful property taxes for the elderly. And I thought they should have some kind of special protection. There's a part of me that says they still do need protection. But maybe some other mechanism. So I've decided to withdraw it.
So is that something that's an official withdrawal for that one? Can that be noted in the minutes then? Is that?
Yeah. I would just say too, we do have, I'm going to get the wording incorrect, but there is a low-income program available now. So you may find.
You might be able to resurrect this in the form of what Bill and Nancy and Donna have asked for, separate accounts to be made available, or new accounts to be made available to the, I guess it'd be to the budget committee, all right? And then the budget committee could decide, yes, I'm gonna fund an account for an elderly tax freeze refund, okay? Where the townspeople would vote on that year after year after year through the FTR, okay? But we don't place any kind of mandatory funding limits. That's one of my problems with some of the things that we've discussed here. I like all of the accounts and everything, but I kind of object to the mandatory funding of those accounts, because I like what's covered in proposal ID number 1. All of the money goes through the FDR.
Yep.
And it all gets voted on.
Yep.
Right? You can have more accounts, I'm fine with that, but so I wouldn't be, opposed to changing that to an account for elderly tax refund, but as it is right now, I reject it.
Withdraw it?
Withdraw it.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so let's, thank you, Richard. So let's have a little discussion here about the groupings here. So these all are different cuts at trying to get to a cap, different angles on ways of trying to get to a cap on tax levy increases. And as you may or may not know, I know well that there is a state law that places a 4% cap on the tax levy. It is subject to override, and there's a variety of crafty ways that you can do that. The easiest way to do it is to declare a shortfall on non-property tax revenue, which I suppose casino money would be considered non-property tax revenue. So anyway, I only use that to frame this discussion, that there is a state tax cap at 4%, but it can be overridden. It has been overridden in the past as well. Floor is open. Any comments, questions? I tried to pick the two most hot topics.
Well, I do have a question for Jeff. Jeff, as you sort of triage these various proposals together, are you intending to propose specific caps or cap values as part of this process, or just that they should have and that the voters should determine the tax value, the tax cap value?
Well, that's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked it, because obviously I've given a lot of thought to that, and I was forced to give more thought to it when I had to triage these all together. But I think there's some levels of, this is something that we'd have to wrestle with, and so if the people vote to tax themselves, you know, does the charter have the right to stop that? I guess that's at one level, right? So you've got that question. So on the other hand, one way to cut some of this stuff is to say that it might be that if you look at the process, okay, that there shall be no recommendation by the Budget Committee in excess of, okay? That kind of thing. So, of a certain percentage, whether it's the levy or whether it's a grant or whatever it is, okay? So, it could be that the limitations that we would discuss are, you know, weaved into that sort of thing, you know, weaved into that. Or, so there's different levels. I mean, and that's why the first one was a cap on tax levy increases. I mean, that's like that's the furthest extreme one, okay? We have a 4% cap. Do we want to, but what does that really mean? I mean, we have an FTR and people get to vote on it. So I do question what, in some ways, you know, what do we accomplish in some ways, because we have the FTR. But I do think maybe that there are some areas in the process where we could put some hurdles, perhaps, to help to control spending in the process more and weave them into, you know, that process. So that's just, I don't have the answers, okay? But I've obviously thought about it a lot, and I put these together, and so to answer your question, which I appreciate, there's that way. Or one other thought I had, and that comes back repeatedly, is that perhaps on the Budget Committee, having like supermajority vote if the tax levy is in excess of a certain percentage. Like, in other words, raise the bar, okay? If, you know, if it's starting to get up there. So that's another idea, supermajority vote, that sort of thing. So I don't quite know what flavor this takes, but it generally falls more in that category than it does in the town of Tiverton shall never have a tax increase greater than X percent. Like, that's a tough one to sell when you have an FTR and people vote. But I could see weaving it into the process some, raising the bar along the way.
I might quickly make the observation and let Nancy comment, is one distinction I draw as I look through these is I'm particularly interested in ways, so if there's a way to have if there's a way that locks in the spending before the people have the chance to vote on it. That might be where you want to consider where we need a charter protection. I mean, how many times back to the budget committee, or even when I was on the other side of the council, if go to your overtime scenario, if that is locked in, if that spending is locked in, and consider this too for your capital accounts too. If someone locks us in for a multi-year, if anything is done on a year-by-year basis, then I think you can almost completely trust, just let the voters decide.
Right.
But if a non-voter body can lock us in, that might be
Okay.
what you're teasing. So I don't know if that's where you're headed.
It was sort of where I was heading, in the sense that it sort of ties into what we were talking about before, town council establishing, I guess, Richard, it's the policy questions. And is there some way, if you were to play Jeff's scenario of maybe a supermajority vote, if the budget committee is going to authorize a certain department going, or a certain budget going above a certain amount, if that is known as it goes, a lot of this is sort of falls within, it feels sort of like micromanaging, but it is all expenses that add up. But if the various departments knew that, for instance, if overtime or whatever these issues are, if they are going to increase by more than a certain percentage, the budget committee is going to feel very comfortable in saying, you know, this is getting out of hand, we're going to need a supermajority. It may have a trickle-down effect of keeping before it happened, because Jeff's right, I mean, Rob's right, once it happens and the contract's been signed, or you can't do it, you can't.
So, what shifting back 2 steps to what Rob said, there was a charter amendment proposed, I think it was by Mr. Medeiros back in the day, and it required that contracts, that before any collective bargaining agreement gets entered, it has to be published for 3 days, okay? So that at least let the people in the town it gave them 3 days to look at it and before it got signed, you know, in the back room. So what I hear from Rob, what just trickled in my head was maybe, well, first of all, 3 days is not enough time to even hold a public meeting. We know that from this commission. So maybe that should be 30 days, or maybe that should be a longer period of time. But secondly, perhaps that contract, we also have a thing called a financial impact statement, or maybe that's what that section says. It's a financial impact statement shall be published 3 days before the signature of the contract. So maybe we could define a financial impact statement as a total compensation cost, like maybe add some teeth to that section, okay? Add some teeth to that section and beef up what the financial impact statement is and make it a reasonable amount of disclosure and not 3 days. And then that may be a place to put a limitation, okay? So, in other words, if you're going to approve a contract that costs more than X percent, you need supermajority vote, or who knows? I'm just putting it out there. But this concept of disclosing it for a longer period of time and defining what the disclosure is in more detail, okay? And then perhaps putting either a hard stop on it or requiring a supermajority vote to approve it if it's going to be too costly, okay? Then that gives the council or the school committee, in this case, bargaining power. You know, like, hey, I need a supermajority vote to approve that. I can't give you guys that. You know, I'm trying to give the school committee and the town council bargaining power here. So that's what this is all about. And that goes to some of Mr. Rahm's points. And so we're just brainstorming here, but I'm going back to what Mr. Medeiros put in the charter, which was very helpful years ago, and now saying maybe we can expand on that, too.
Because it needs teeth. What he put in, there was no remedy.
Well, it was huge what he put in there. Right, transparency, but now we could give it some teeth.
You could give it teeth that
Yeah.
would have some weight. Yeah.
Did someone write that down?
Would anybody from the public like to be heard on any of these items at 8B? I'm sorry? Oh, go ahead. You want to? You may speak, absolutely, yes. I was wondering that.
All right,
Just kidding.
You only spoke about one aspect of busting a budget. There's also another way to bust a budget, and that's grants. One, I'll just give an example. The town council is asked to give approval to even put a proposal in to apply for a grant. Within that grant, it's going to cost the town $2.6 million. And no one has any say about it. It's to hire more people. It also breaches a contract. And we need to have some type of process that doesn't give all this control and approval for that sort of a thing by the town council. That doesn't seem right, that then all of a sudden, you've got this, there's going to be problems if you try to get out of it, there'll be problems with you getting, the people that gave it, making you pay money for it. So, I mean, that already happened this year. I don't know where they are with that grant, but it was going to breach contract. It was going to, by the end of the 3 years, it was going to cost the town $2.6 million for extra personnel that we didn't need. So I found that really troubling, and there wasn't anything there was no tools for the taxpayer to use to prevent that from happening. It was strictly that someone thought it was a good idea. They went to the town council. The town council gave approval to apply for it, and then the taxpayer was going to get stuck with this bill. So,
If it came in. If it comes in.
And you couldn't change your mind on it once it happened. And you had to keep that personnel. You couldn't, like, lay them off or, so anyway, that's also a problem that's not spoken about. I don't know how often that's happened. I don't know. I just know that it happened this year. I don't know where we are in that process, but I just didn't think that was right. Needs to be some protection from that.
There might be a common theme, again, that may be an instance where you have something happening outside of the FTR that is locking in spending. I mean, that may
Yes.
be the common thread.
That's exactly
Richard?
what it was.
I'd like to get back to what Steve said a couple hours ago, seems like. We need to keep our level of talk about the town charter at a much higher level. If we talk, it seems to me we're starting to talk about, well, how do we keep the town council from making bad decisions? How do we keep the school committee from making bad decisions? And I don't care how much verbiage you put in the town charter, it'll never happen. Okay? What has to happen is if they start making bad decisions, such as what Donna just spoke about with the police and the fire, what they've just hired, well, guess what? Next year, when we vote on the FTR, on the budget, you don't have, the police chief and the fire chief won't have the budget to support their firefighters. So what are they gonna do? And that's their problem, okay? So there are consequences for bad decisions. Consequences that arise from the budget. And as long as the people have control of the budget and the FTR is in place and we protect protect that FTR, then the consequences come true. And now the police chief and the fire chief has a huge problem. And they were the ones that instigated the problems. But we can't do anything about the town council. Look, you know, what we can do about the town council is every 2 years, we re-elect all of them. All right? That's about the only limit that I think we can change to the town charter is how to keep councils and boards from doing stupid things. Well, you know what? You're gonna get reelected every 2 years. And if you do something stupid, your budget's gonna be incredibly painful.
Well, I just don't know if it would come under Section 203, but to tie $2.6 million onto the taxpayer without voter approval and also breaching a contract makes me wonder if it comes under Section 203. By approval of major appropriations without voter approval, locking them into all this expense, and penalties if
But
they
that's a
found.
charter violation.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it just makes me wonder if perhaps they're overstepping their bounds when they go for a grant like that. And I don't ever know that there's been any talk about that sort of,
They probably did overstep their bounds.
Yeah, that's a charter complaint.
Right? That's a charter complaint. Who's gonna prosecute that?
you know,
So,
I don't even think anyone ever thought of it that way. I don't know, but it was,
Now,
So-
maybe we could improve the charter such that the hiring process is a much more rigid process, right? Kind of like a launch sequence of a nuclear missile, right? You just don't sit down your coffee cup on a switch and boom, you started World War III. There's a lot of things that have to lead up to a launch. So, and in the case of hiring somebody, there's a lot of things that have to lead up to it. They have to have a check mark. You could put something like that into the charter, that there are these checks that have to be made. And if they aren't made, this person doesn't get hired. Maybe, like I noticed on a lot of the contracts, the individual contracts, there were just 2 signatures. One of them was not the town council. Well, maybe it should have been, right? Maybe there should have been another check in there. Say, oh, you wanna hire a firefighter? Oh, you need the fire chief, you need the town,
administrator, I think.
town administrator, and you need town council president signature. You don't have that, you don't have an offer letter.
okay, so I'm gonna go back to Jeff, because actually, just to because we've hit our half hour. All of these are your sponsor items. I think you've heard, just from a distance, it seems like there's some crossover items with some of the labor piece that I think I've seen from Richard, and I've certainly heard Donna raise the alarm, I guess is the right word, on some of the grant pieces. Have you gotten a good sense of the committee, some feedback on all these, or what would you like? I would
Well,
just leave these open till they come up.
Yeah, I would, I guess my sense is, I have 2 comments to make, but specifics, but just in general, I think this was instructive. I think we should just leave them open. I don't think we're in discussion now anyway, so I'd rather, if there's gonna be any work done with man-hours, outside of this table, independent work or whatever, I'd rather work on the other stuff we already discussed tonight. So I would just leave these open and let them drift sideways, frankly, and let
that's fine.
everyone
Just
sit
if
on
you
them,
go.
yeah. But I do have 2 comments I
Others
just
are
want to,
free to put in proposals as well,
Yeah.
based on this, but yeah, go ahead.
I do have 2
Close
comments
out.
to Richard's comment. First of all, if you look at proposal number 10 and 11, I'll just read them. Language to regulate firefighter force size and language to regulate police force size. That's my proposal 10 and 11, and you effectively just came to that point. Now, I'll admit that I put this in here in reaction to what I witnessed this year. I'll own that and admit that. It was a bit reactionary. But throughout this conversation, you know, what Rob said earlier and what Donna said about, you know, a decision, and then what happened, and this is my second point, and I want to just explain a different viewpoint of what you said about this. What happens is, once these contracts are signed, and 4 or 5 months goes by, and all of a sudden budget season starts, and then you see this year and year and year. Well, we need 2.5% more for that line item. Well, why? Well, because it's the contract. And now it was signed 6 months ago. So just rebutting a little bit what you know about you can't contain certain things and actions of people. And the problem is, and I think there's some other things you're seeing in trying to take an attempt at that, is because these things do get signed, and they come back, oh, and by the way, I didn't say this, but the ultimate is, in many cases, they go to binding arbitration, right? So, like, and when it's a signed contract, it's not a very strong hand for the taxpayer, okay? Or for those on the side of, we don't want to pay this, because you signed the contract, you have to pay this. So taxpayers, get out your wallet. So I just wanted to, I've witnessed this for decades, a couple of them now. So I wanted to share with you how that does play out, okay? And while, yes, we can't control, I don't want to use the S word, but you can't control actions of people maybe that are elected, there's certainly a temptation to try to put some things in place to mitigate against locking in these things mid-year and then passing the bill on and the statement on at the annual budget time to say, oh, you need to come up with the money because it's a contract. Well, who signed it? Well, we did 6 months ago. You know, and then that's what happens invariably. So that's the temptation for this, okay? So, thank you.
All right, I'm going to try
Well,
to.
excuse me just for a second, Rep. It sounds to me, Jeff, like what we need, if we don't have it, is a process that says before a contract or a grant that is going to require incremental hiring, we need a full budget impact statement, a multi-year budget impact statement, so that in turn can be, you know, a heads up for the budget committee and the town.
And I think that goes to the teeth section, like a financial impact disclosure.
Yep.
And I think that they do exist, maybe in state law or something, but maybe we can add teeth to that so that, you know, if it's going to be a costly one, it needs a supermajority vote or something. I don't know what the answer is, but, you know, something that gives it teeth and raises the bar a bit if a body's going to go there. So that was, I think that closes it out nice. Thank you.
Just to mention that after all contracts, and you can see it online, there is an impact study.
Right.
The problem I see with the impact study is that it doesn't tell you what the levy's going to be. It doesn't say what that's really going to cost. It just, it's a bunch of numbers, and it comes out with some type of resolution, and there it is.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I
putting
mean-
some teeth in it.
And it doesn't translate to the taxpayer impact 6 months later.
Except that, here it is, and you have to pay for it.
Right, and
Yeah.
so that's the teeth. I don't know what those teeth are, but that's the concept, and that's a really good point.
Okay, so I think this will line up rather nicely, because we're going to have the next meeting on the 4th. We'll be refocusing on casino, but on the 20th, we're also going to be talking about some of these labor negotiations, and that might be a good time to pick some of these up again on the 20th. I do want to see if we can squeeze in one more before 10 o'clock, which is item 8C, which is Donna's proposal number 34, requiring town video recordings of meetings. Do you want to spend 5 minutes on that one before we call it a night?
All right, first of all, I would need to know from Andrew what exactly I should call this, because I guess people have said it's not videotaping or video. I want to use the right wording. Is it filming now?
What's wrong with videotaping?
Someone made it a big.
Digitizing.
Someone took
Video recording.
I don't think that's, and you get what we want to be able to watch it on TV.
He said
However, the-
video recording.
Did he say it's video recording?
Yes.
I would assume that would be most definite versus audio. Video.
Audio?
Well, if you were just put recording, it could be audio. If you wanted it to be the video, put video.
Because we're having the video, it's video recording.
And audio comes with video.
Right.
You get the audio for free.
Oh, no.
Well, it's funny that you brought this up, because I was going to see if you'd consider requiring at least just audio, because then you don't have the argument that it's a cost, right? Because audio is cheaper, but we'll get to that. It's your floor.
I'll do whatever is recommended. If someone didn't like the wording of video, anyway. Yeah, so language to require that the town, audio or video, the meetings of the elected officials, including all public hearings and any other matter of public concern. The reason for consideration is the charter is silent on video and audio of the meetings and is not required, although this has become a standard practice for town council, school committee, and budget committee and all public hearings. I brought this to the forefront because we were having difficulty having our charter review commission video or audioed. We didn't have a budget for it, and it had been requested by a concerned public resident that they would like it, and I agree, it should be, so we are having it done, and they did get us, the town council did get us a budget for that, but it's not required, so I want it to be required. So effective change would be, it would become an integral part, along with the minutes of the meeting, of maintaining a record of what happened at the meetings and should be made available for the public to view. And that's why I put that in.
Ray and Jeff?
I think it's a good idea, but I think your reasoning is faulty.
It's faulty.
Yeah.
Enlighten me, Ray.
Well, the only reason that you would ever have a record of something is to keep future arguments to a minimum. Now, why
Okay.
else would you want something like that?
Because
What-
then you have something to go to. When you do have a question about the minutes, you can then
That's
review
right,
that.
so you're
what he said.
mitigating the arguments, right?
Right, right.
Okay, so there's your reasoning.
Okay.
There's your reasoning.
Thank you, Ray.
It's not
Who
because
found this
the
guy?
charter doesn't have it.
But-
It's
but it
because
doesn't.
we don't want to have any arguments later that you said this, that was wrong, they didn't write the
No,
minutes
we're missing
down.
an entire, no,
But-
it's not that, it's so that the public can make the observation when they can't be here. And there's so many things that
Well,
don't
yeah,
make it to
yeah,
the
there's
minutes.
that, yeah, there's that too, but they can only observe.
Like, it's not even this commission, which is great that it's videoed, but there's all these casino subcommittees. Have they ever been videoed or audioed? I mean, it's just Nancy, right? So-
Well, you could sit
so-
home, Ray, and you could watch it on TV. I just-
Yeah, but it's still, just because I watch it on TV wouldn't mean I could do anything about it.
But you can still watch it.
You could write a letter to the.
So what? Then why would you, if I could just watch it, why would you want to spend the money on it? I mean, there's plenty of other good stuff on TV than watching us sitting around talking to each
You
other.
might want to write a
'Cause
letter
it-
to the editor.
Well,
It keeps the public, if they want to be able to
Well,
look
yeah.
at the meeting.
Yeah, for sure,
Yeah,
for sure.
so.
Absolutely.
And actually maybe have popcorn while they do it.
There you go.
Jeff and Richard?
I think, I don't know where this one's going, but I do believe that, and I'm trying to, somehow my binder's out of order here, but I do believe that there are a lot of boards and commissions in town, and this says here, require the town video meetings of elected officials. Okay, so it would not include the boards and commissions. And I apologize for not having been on this page a minute ago. All elected officials, so, okay, so it is, the scope is limited. That was my concern. I'm done.
Well, but doesn't it also say include all public hearings and other matters?
Right.
I mean, if it were me, it's not, and maybe I would move to amend this, but I don't think it's too much to ask, and I don't think it's costly to task the chair to at least audio record. I mean, that's virtually free now, right? Now, maybe, I'm not saying we impose an obligation to make that into a transcript. you know, but that seems to me a pretty reasonable balance. But, Richard?
Well, I'm getting back to Jeff's point here. I mean, why don't you just put a period after elected officials in all, right? I mean, anytime they have a meeting, you record it, if you're an elected official. Because I got confused here, Donna. And it said,
You can-
and include in all public hearings in any other matter of public concerns.
Well, the other matter of public concern would be the casino subcommittee, and public hearings are usually
Planning board,
on
zoning
there,
board.
but
They're not elected officials.
I'm saying, and including public hearings and any other matter, so I'm.
So
I'm in-
all meetings, everything.
Well, whatever, no, public hearings,
Public
hearings.
The subcommittee is appointed.
But
And if you want to have the subcommittee done, it comes under that, which would be, if you decide that that's public concern, then you could have that audio. Right now, there's nothing in the charter about that at all.
There's
And
a-
they pick and
there's-
choose.
There's a lot of boards and commissions in this.
this is a $100,000 bill or a $200,000
Yeah,
bill.
It's just a lot.
I mean-
I think if you could, Donna, could you work on limiting the scope? Maybe just to elected officials, because the others don't really score.
But the public hearings are the budget committee here,
Those are
hearing.
elected officials,
That's true.
right? But.
No,
and the
they
school
did, no,
board,
no,
those are
the
elected officials.
planning board, they do the planning
Okay,
board,
the planning board, they're not elected,
right.
okay?
But they're one of the most
They
important.
they don't have the force of law. So-
Well-
But they do. I mean, the zoning board does, for sure. I mean, some of these commissions have some pretty important.
I mean, the planning
you-
board can lock the town
That's true,
into
they
things
do
that
have-
you might not
Another way
like.
you might,
They do have power.
you might want to cut it too, and we've talked a few times where I think there's this sort of creep that you want to add mission creep more and more to the charter. I mean, maybe this is where we say, look, if this body is so important that it needs to be in the charter, then why is it too much to ask to audio tape or videotape the meetings? So that seems to be the feedback is.
Well, it's
some
just a
boundary.
proposal, and a proposal is subject to change, or
It is.
if the wording's not correct, I mean,
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to
know.
do, I'm trying to get better wording. I want you to be able to define the scope a little bit better.
okay, I'll get my committee together. And we'll-
Well, I mean,
If you
yeah,
say everything,
Yeah.
that
All right,
means the
all right, I'll
sanitary
sit down with my
commission
committee
gets
and we'll
more.
decide this.
right, that's the point. I mean, every single board and commission is a matter of public concern by definition. So I think what Richard's saying is, as written, okay, every single board and commission, if they have a role, then they are a matter of public concern. So therefore,
so
they would be, so I
we'll
think
work
that's
on
what
the
Richard's getting
language.
at, is so,
Yeah.
somehow, if this is gonna move forward, to limit the scope of it, and I think that's, and maybe it's this way with recording, audio, or I don't know how you limit the scope, but all I know is that if, as worded, there would be an argument that we have to record every single cemetery commission meeting, so to speak, and that's a $200,000 bill. I mean, if they meet 12 times a year each, that's $1,000 each, there's 30 of them, plus all the other, it's a $100,000 bill, whatever it is. So I think there needs to be consideration to
Okay.
the specifics, if it were to move forward.
It's another pocket for the casino.
All right, so this should be continued?
Well, it's
Well,
just
I
preliminary
think we're just
discussion,
discussing
so
it,
you're just
so-
you're just getting feedback, you're in the dunk tank.
All right,
taking-
we'll take a look at the wording,
okay.
my committee and
Scope.
the scope.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of topics today. I don't know exactly how many I feel like we've hit quite a few of them, so it was a very productive meeting. We've reached 10 o'clock, so unless there's a supermajority that wants to press on, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there any objection to adjourning?
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. All right. Any